Hey guys, ever thought your toughest shift was a 9 to 5 in an air-conditioned office? Imagine scrubbing blood, sweat, and Victorian morals off stained satin sheets while praying the upstairs client doesn't faint from syphilis or oversleep past your next meal. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. The moment you step off the cobblestones and into the flickering gaslight of Madame Ruddle's parlor of pleasures, you're hit with three immediate truths. It smells like rotting roses, deodorant was invented centuries later, and personal boundaries have taken an eternal vacation. You, fresh-faced, starry-eyed, and armed with a sprig of lavender in your corset, are introduced to your new wardrobe. A flimsy chemise that offers as much modesty as a tea towel on laundry day. By sunrise, you'll master the art of silent smiling. Not the appreciative smile one dispenses to a kind patron, but the Cheshire Cat beam that says, "Yes, sir, I will lift this corset string," again, while you unsuccessfully attempt to button up your bloomers in less than 2 minutes. The trick is arching, your eyebrows just enough to convey sympathy for his fumbling, all while praying he doesn't think your eyes betray revulsion. Within your first hour, the senior girls will drill you on client etiquette. Always ask, "May I refresh your brandy?" before anything else. They'll hiss, because nothing says hospitality like an unholy mixture of stale ale and diluted whiskey. Meanwhile, flitting from chaise lounge to tea tray, you'll discover the bitter truth. Your legs will tremble under the strain of half-inch heels, designed not for comfort, but to show off your calves and keep you perched like a startled parrot. At noon, lunch arrives, a crusty roll, a sliver of cheese, and a cup of sour water. The brothel's kitchen wouldn't be caught dead serving quality victuals. Imagine paying good money for a taste of something that doesn't come with a side of fleas. You'll furtively nibble your meager ration in a corner curtained room, away from the gilded smackers of high society upstairs. Every bite reminds you that in 1887, employee benefits meant you weren't beaten within an inch of your life. Yet. By mid-afternoon, Madame Ruddle herself glides into your chambers. Picture a woman half her age with half her face, one eye hidden under a tattered veil, the other sharp enough to slice through your excuses. She inspects your posture, your powder application, even the angle at which your gloves rest on the mahogany table. A stray eyelash down, you'll hear about it in language more colorful than a chamber pot splash. Clients arrive in two flavors. The blustery aristocrat who expects conversation laced with deference, and the desperate journeyman who can't string two coherent sentences together. The aristocrat demands champagne, pianists, and a recitation of Byron's poetry, like some Dickensian Rumpelstiltskin demanding raw cotton spun into gold. The journeyman, on the other hand, needs constant direction. Over here? No, that's the chamber pot. The other way. Meanwhile, your co-workers, some seasoned survivors, others wide-eyed innocents like you yesterday, warn of the terrors, syphilis, gonorrhea, tuberculosis. They pass around homemade remedies, tea infused with foxglove, a plant so poisonous it'll kill you faster than the disease, or ointments made from rancid goose grease. Each one is more likely to destroy your health than cure it, but hey, desperate times call for untested herbalism. Don't forget the night's crescendo, the Kitty Hawk special. A body rite of passage where you'll juggle 3 clients at once, each with a watch ticking like an alarm clock strapped to your spine. Your fingers blister, your back aches, and you'll swear your corset is murderous torture device engineered by sadistic tailors. Yet, you smile. You pant. You convince yourself this is the pinnacle of feminine empowerment, right before you vomit behind the curtain. If you survive past the midnight hour, and trust me, most don't, you'll learn the meaning of punctual cruelty. At exactly 1 a.m., Madame flings open the doors for a surprise inspection. "Who's asleep?" she bellows. One yawn from the wrong girl, and she's dragged by the ankles into the basement dungeon, a place rumored to harbor starving rats and unlicensed barbers. And no one ever speaks of what exactly happens thereafter. Sleep, you ask? In the world of a Victorian brothel worker, it's a myth perpetuated by novelists. Your mattress is a sack of straw laced with bedbugs practicing sharp-dressed insult society. You'll spend half the night negotiating treaties with them. the other half haunted by echoes of suppressed sobs from the passage walls. Did someone call for more gentlemen callers at dawn? Likely. You'll wake to the tolling church bells across the street, and that's just your internal clock reminding you another day of servitude begins. But let's pause on the glamour of glittering sex work for a moment and talk about fashion. Corsets, dear viewer, are medieval torture devices masquerading as Victorian chic. 16 waist inches, no problem. How about breathing only 3 times per minute? Charming. The moment you lace up, your organs play hide and seek. You'll never know if your spleen is in your ribcage or hiding under your bosom, plotting its escape. Yet, you traipse across polished oak floors with the grace of a swan, if that swan also had a permanent backache in the world's worst case of indigestion. At 8 a.m., the doors swing open again, and a fresh parade of clients bleary-eyed from last night's moral hangover shuffles inside. They'll clutch their pocket watches, ensuring every second of their coin is squeezed for maximum delight and minimum conversation. Your lips, once pink and plush, turn chapped from endless kissing and a complete lack of lip balm. Your hair, twisted into moral approval medals by the housemaid, falls in uneven curls that resemble a wilted cabbage. By the time the sun hides behind smog-choked chimneys at dusk, you've learned the essential survival strategy: emotional detachment. You must convince your heart that every encounter is a mechanical transaction, lest your soul dissolves in a vat of self-pity. When a client describes you as angelic or divine, you'll smile internally and think, "Buddy, I'm just an overworked cog in Madame's money machine." Yet, amid the chaos, there's a dark camaraderie. You share whispered jokes about a client's monocle popping off mid-coitus or the time old Mr. Featherby tried to pay you with counterfeit sovereigns. Those fleeting moments of laughter, stolen in the cracks between candlelight and despair, are your only comfort. In that house, trust is scarce, but humor is the coin that buys you sanity. And what of your dreams? They'll be a cocktail of gin hallucinations and longing for a life where your worth isn't measured in shillings per hour. You'll fantasize about fresh breezes, Sunday church bells not followed by an invitation to Madame's snug parlor, and waking up without a corset crushing your lungs. But dawn always arrives, dripping with new obligations, and you're lured back under the red velvet curtain for another round. So by the time those first 24 hours tick away, you'll have earned a diploma in bodily commerce, emotional armor plating, and a masterclass in self-preservation. You'll possess an encyclopedic knowledge of lecherous proclivities, some of them you're not proud to speak about at the dinner table, and an unshakable suspicion that history's greatest horrors included an episode titled "A Day in the Life of a Victorian Brothel Worker." Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore the covert economies running beneath the silk sheets, bribes to the constable, secret alliances with midwives, and the forbidden art of forging one's last will and testament in case Madame's wrath boils over. But for now, congratulate yourself. You've survived the opening act of this Victorian nightmare. Just be grateful you can pause this video whenever you like. Unlike poor Lily, who's chained to her labor in the Queen's darkest den of delights. End of part 1. By the dawn of your second day, your sore muscles and what remains of your dignity are already bargaining for mercy. You resume your station behind the crimson velvet drapes, but beneath the polished floors and the velvet facade lies a hidden economy more elaborate than any penny dreadful. Every coin you clutch between your gloved fingers is either a blessing or a bribe, and the truant maestros of this subterranean market wield ink-stained quills and iron-clad wills. First, there's the constable's cut. You learn quickly that the local bobbies turn a blind eye, quite literally if you slip one extra sovereign into their palms. A single gold coin greases the gears of law enforcement, ensuring any kerfuffle upstairs is hushed before it reaches the Queen's ears. But that coin rarely comes free. Madame Ruddle claims a hefty slice before you even get your chance to smile seductively at your patron. Soon enough, you're running mental ledgers. Half a crown to the constable, a shilling to the house, a farthing to your personal stash, if you can manage to set anything aside. Then there's the apothecary alliance. The local quack sells remedies that promise to cure every ailment under the sun, from the clap to consumption. His ledger is a shorthand of desperation. Names scribbled in charcoal, debts due at the next moon. You've watched women hand over brooches and lockets in exchange for foxglove tea, only to find themselves gasping for breath faster than before. Yet, word of mouth turns these potions into sought-after commodities. an ironic twist when the house's unofficial motto becomes better dead than diseased. Meanwhile, Madame's secret ledger rivals any banker's vault. Behind a false panel in her mahogany desk lies a stack of wills and testaments, each meticulously drafted by her own hand or that of a retired solicitor willing to conspire for a generous fee. One misplaced comma could redirect your meager savings to a fellow courtesan, or leave you penniless should anything untoward happen. You're taught to forge a will in your favor, forging signatures with the flair of an artist painting on a damp canvas. Nothing cements survival like ensuring your final shilling is spent on a proper funeral, rather than Madame's morgue fund. Midwives bustle through the parlor's hidden passageways, offering discreet services for the brothel's more venturous clients. They trade in gossip as much as they trade in infants, scandalous tidbits about Lady Pembroke sneaking through the back door, or Lord Fenton's penchant for foot fetishes. You find yourself bartering information for oatcakes or a scrap of cheese. In this world, a well-placed rumor is more valuable than a duke's favor, especially when it saves you from parting with your only spoon. By midday, you're initiated into the Great Sock Exchange, where lost stockings and mismatched gloves are hoarded like dragon's gold. Each pair carries a story. The tear from Baron Hemsworth's impatient grip, the stain from Mr. Prendergast's botched brandy spill. Women swap these items for small acts of mercy, an extra inch of crinoline, a swig of ersatz champagne, or simply a moment's reprieve in a sunlit courtyard. You hoard your own torn garters, haggling them away only when the alternative is starvation. Every so often, a newcomer arrives, wide-eyed and trembling. A sacrificial lamb on day 1, but by day 2, her white eyes have the sheen of entitlement turned to cynicism. You introduce her to the ledger ritual, a mock accounting lesson at the cashier's desk, where she must tally her first shilling and allocate portions for house rent, police grease, and personal survival. Fail to allocate correctly, and you'll find your bloomers replaced with a neighbor's torn stays. Succeed, and you earn a sliver of respect in the house's cutthroat hierarchy. You also pick up the clandestine art of letter smuggling. Patrons insist on sending secret correspondences to mistresses in distant parlors or clandestine lovers hidden behind lace curtains. You learn to affix wax seals so convincing they fool postmasters and priests alike. One misdirected letter could expose the tangled web of aristocratic adultery that props up the entire brothel industry. You guard these letters as fiercely as any treasure chest. After all, knowledge of scandal is your ultimate bargaining chip. Night brings out the real financiers, the silent investors. These are wealthy patrons who tip not with coins, but with promises of future security, offered protection when you hang up your chemise for the last time. They sponsor your education in the back parlors, letters to the local schoolmaster, dance classes at Mrs. Whitcomb's studio, or a modest rental cottage in Battersea. The catch? You owe them obedience, a shout of praise at every dinner party, and perhaps a discreet disappearance when the London Gazette comes sniffing around. And then there's the black market of bones, a macabre side hustle run by the house's mortician. When a courtesan falls ill beyond saving, her body is delivered to the basement, and the very bones she prayed over are sold to medical schools for dissection. You overhear hushed accounts of students in pockmarked labs marveling at femurs once pranced across the parlor's dance floor. It's the ultimate sacrifice, your remains fueling the next generation of physicians who might just cure the very diseases that plagued you. Despite the dark economy, a sense of perverse community flourishes. You and the other women form alliances over chipped teacups, wagering small bets on who will last longest without a carriage ride to the local infirmary. You celebrate each tiny victory, surviving that one particularly odious client, finding an extra stale biscuit tucked behind the pantry door, or hearing that the housemaid managed to sneak in a round of warmed milk and honey. These fleeting joys sustain you through the darker rituals of coin counting and clandestine transactions. By twilight on day 2, you've accumulated enough scrappy knowledge to publish a pamphlet entitled How to Brothel, a survivalist's guide to Victorian vice. You'd be a millionaire in another life, or at least a moderately comfortable seamstress buying real underwear. But for now, you tuck your forged will into your garter, shake hands with the constable's lamplighter for next month's payment, and pocket a flask of foxglove tea for emergencies. Your reflection in the gilded mirror looks less like a terrified child and more like a battle-hardened criminal accountant, one who can outwit pimps, plague, and perhaps even death itself. So when the second sunrise peeks through your curtained window, you're no longer a naive newcomer. You're a ledger-wielding, rumor-trading, bone-smuggling entrepreneur in a house of painted smiles and whispered betrayals. You know now that the true currency isn't gold, it's secrets, and as long as you guard them fiercely, you just might survive another 24 hours in this Victorian nightmare. By the third sunrise, your body feels less like a temple and more like a condemned building on its final inspection. Your ribs are the joists creaking under every breath, and your heart is a crowbar prying you awake at dawn. Today's agenda? Mastering the double life, outward obedience by gaslight, clandestine revolt by candle's end. Morning finds you standing sentinel at the landing, escorting the first bleary-eyed client up the narrow staircase. He's the kind of fellow who wears his hangover like a medal, mouth dry as sawdust, eyes glassy, hair plastered to his skull. He fumbles for the banister, then pauses, gaze drifting over the gleaming brass numbers on the door. Room 3. You tap the plaque with a white-gloved finger and offer a smile so practiced it could fool a portrait painter. Inside, the parlor awaits you, a chaise, a piano, and all the decency removed. By mid-morning, you're summoned to the prestige parlor, the upstairs suite reserved for aristocrats whose last names have more syllables than you have days left in this hell. Here, your script shifts. You recite the latest poetry circulating among salon circles, your voice measured as you quote Tennyson or Shelley with faux reverence. The Duke leans back, brandy swirling in his glass, eyes half-lidded. When he eventually demands something more corporeal than sonnets, you glide toward him, all discreet deference. Yet your mind notes the faint impression of his whipcord knuckles, the death grip on his purse. He tips you with 2 sovereigns, and you tuck them away, one for Madame, one for, well, you. But before you can slip it into your garter, the maid appears like a ghost, ready to refill his glass, remind him of his time limit. Rush out, catch your breath, then accept a stale bun in the kitchen corridor. It's in that cramped space you overhear whispers of the Blue Blood Society, an underground coterie formed by the Brothels alumni, their membership card, a faded cameo brooch pinned to the lapel, worn backward. Meetings are held in the cellar, beneath piles of barley sacks and empty brandy barrels. Tonight's agenda: rescuing that poor young girl locked away in room 7, who's fallen afoul of a magistrate's son and is now being held for ransom. The society's code echoes across generations: protect one another, exact vengeance on those who cross the bloodline, even if that blood is metaphorical. Afternoon brings the gentleman's lecture, a weekly spectacle in which Madame invites the local gentry to discuss philosophy, and then demo some of their newest whips and chains. You stand quietly at the back, your eyes flicking among the assembled men. One boasts of his disciplined techniques on orphaned urchins, another shows off a patent leather paddle lined with small brass studs. Each claims it's for artistic refinement. You feel bile rise. When it's over, you're assigned to demonstrate posture drills. Raise your chin, square your shoulders, pretend this deranged pageant is an act of grace rather than a rehearsal for your own funeral pyre. Once the lecture concludes, you're hustled to the attic, where the day's worn garments are stripped, shaken out, and restarched. You scrub at lace collars stiff with grime, rinse rouge-stained linens, and mop up puddles of spilled brandy. The washerwoman hums a dirge as she wrings water from a chemise, an unsubtle reminder that you're expendable. When you ask for more soap, she tosses you a hand-me-down bar, whose edges are already rounded from decades of use. You lather and rinse, feeling your fingertips prune under the caustic suds. Evening heralds the masquerade hour, when clients don masks and costumes for role-play fantasies. Venetian masks with twisted expressions, feathered plumes, velvet cloaks. Each gaggle of fools believes they're engaging in forbidden romance, yet none suspect the real subterfuge. You're the only one literate enough to read the secret code Madame, inks onto the back of every mask. That tiny cipher denotes which women are off-limits, too young, too debt-burdened, or too likely to snitch. You memorize the code, swapping identities like a stage actor, lest you accidentally cross the line and draw the ire of a masked marquis. By candle's guttering light, you attend the Blue Blood Society meeting. The stairs to the cellar groan beneath your steps. A single flickering lamp illuminates neck-high shelves of contraband, forged passports, bribes in gossamer pouches, tiny vials of laudanum. A former courtesan presides, her cheek scarred from a particularly brutish client. She extends a gloved hand. Tonight we free one of our own. Who will lead? You volunteer, heart pounding, not for glory, but for the promise of solidarity beyond these walls. The rescue mission unfolds like a twisted scavenger hunt. You slip through the corridor behind the magistrate's son's favorite quarters, guided by narrow shafts of moonlight. The locks are archaic, but practiced fingers loosen the bolt. The girl within is gaunt, eyes wide in terror, nightdress torn. You cover her with a spare cloak, murmur reassurances you barely believe. Keep your voice down. I've got you. Together, you tiptoe through the house until you reach the servant's exit, but halfway, the boy's footstep snaps like a twig overhead. You freeze, breath held. The girl's pulse throbs against your glove. Footstep, closer. You press her against the wall. The society's senior member hurls a handful of soot from a hidden pouch. The magistrate's son coughs as black powder coats his white waistcoat. You and the girl slip past him, vanish into the London fog. Back in the parlor, the girl weeps soft sobs. The senior member places a hand on her shoulder. You'll stay with us until the ransom blows over. You slide the cloak from your shoulders and wrap it around the girl. When she falls silent, eyes red but defiant, you feel a surge of something other than dread. Hope. Maybe there is life beyond these slatted windows, beyond Madame's velvet prison. The remainder of your night is a blur of shadowy encounters. You must now settle the evening's accounts, tally coins, redistribute bribes, note the magistrate's son's heavy purse for when the ransom drops. Your quill scratches until ink runs dry. You dip into your emergency vial, finger trembling from laudanum's edge. You feel the pull of that drowsy oblivion, the sweetest escape from aching bones and clenched nerves. But duty calls. Another knock at the door, another eager hand reaching across the threshold. You rise, swallow the remaining painkillers, and steel yourself. When the last candle guttering in the parlor is snuffed, you return to your straw mattress. Tonight, sleep will be haunted by images of leather straps and powdered faces by the girl's tear-streaked cheeks. Yet in the quiet, you clutch the cameo brooch, a symbol of your new allegiance, and whisper, I am not alone. Day 3's ledger reads, 1 successful rescue, 2 new debts to the society, 3 infected scrapes to stitch, half a vial of laudanum, and a battered sense of self you find both unsettling and strangely comforting. You learn that in this place, survival is not just about muscle and concealment, but about forging bonds with the broken-hearted and courageous. Tomorrow promises new horrors, a medical demonstration touted as philanthropic, but in truth a vivisection of a stray dog in the courtyard, a midnight auction for the house's most decorated courtesan, a surprise visitation from the local press, hunting scandal like salmon to the net. But for now, you press your cheek against the hard floorboards, inhale the lingering scent of lavender sachets, and drift into a restless half-sleep. You've done more than last yesterday. You've outwitted the magistrate's lineage, you've earned the society's trust, and you've tasted the bitter tang of kinship in a world built on exploitation. You may not last to dawn, but if disaster comes, you'll face it armed with secrets, alliances, and the unbreakable will to refuse victimhood. End of Part 3. By the 4th sunrise, your soul has settled into the brothel's rhythms like a cracked gramophone record, familiar, yet inevitably warped. Today marks the culmination of your unwanted apprenticeship in vice and survival. You push aside the tattered curtain to reveal the courtyard below, where a ragged trio of pigeons coos over scattered crumbs. Even they look better fed than you. Morning's first task is the inventory. You step into the dust-choked back room, where dozens of battered trunks, crinolines piled sky-high, and boxes of half-melted candles await reckoning. Each item is accounted for in a ledger thicker than any Bible. Scarlet chemises, silk masks with frayed feathers, boots worn thin at the heels. You cross-reference Madame's annotations in ornate script, diagonally slashing any discrepancies. One missing shoe could cost you a night in the dungeon. One extra pair unaccounted is grounds for Madame's corrective measures. While tallying, you overhear a spat between 2 apprentices, young Molly, whose cheeks are still rosy from innocence, and old Betsy, whose cheekbones have sharper angles than any corset wire. Betsy accuses Molly of absconding with a maid's tournevis. A simple hairpin turned contraband after making its way into the hands of a client for provocative doodling across lace. Suddenly, your own stash of crooked pins seems petty, but then again, petty is often enough to stay alive here. Once inventory is completed with a suspiciously generous nod from Madame, you're whisked upstairs to attend the charity breakfast, a macabre phrase for an event where wealthy matrons sip tepid tea and donate tiny sums to the brothel, a rehabilitation fund. You display an exquisite tableside manner learned over sleepless nights, a tilt of the chin, an emphatic nod, a well-timed throat clear. You're introduced as Miss Adelaide, though no one remembers your real name anymore. As they pass around small coin purses, you fantasize about spending those coins on a proper bath, once your day's labors are done, of course. But what truly awaits is the final ordeal, a midnight gala meant to honor the house's reign of pleasure over the past quarter century. Guests arrive in a caravan of horse-drawn carriages, each one more lavish than the last. Gold filigree wheels, silk-lined cabins, lamp-bearers whose lanterns flicker like dying fireflies. They expect an evening of decadence, live harpists, dramatic recitals, and a grand auction of curiosities. You overhear that the pièce de résistance is a dance performance by the brothel's finest, a farewell ballet for Miss Constance, who's been promoted to mistress of a newer establishment in Brighton. Your role? Lead dancer. Yesterday's rescue mission earned you this dubious honor. You're measured for a tutu so stiff it feels like a shallow coffin. Sequins catch the lamplight, scattering prismatic shards across your bruised ankles. Beneath the stage lights, you're to spin and dip as though reveling in your gloomiest nightmares. The irony isn't lost on you. After 4 days of bodily commerce, you're about to be paraded as an emblem of elegance. Afternoon is consumed by rehearsals in the private salon, a mirrored hell where music drips like honey into your ears, and Madame's voice rings sharper than any metronome. Point your toes. Smile through the agony, she commands as you trip over fallen rose petals, a last-minute flourish to add dramatic effect. The other dancers practice leaps that seem impossible. You master a curtsy so deep it almost breaks your spine. You catch yourself in the glossy glass, a gaunt silhouette perched on point, powdered face on the verge of cracking. Evening descends in layers of cobalt dusk. You slip into your costume behind the gauzy backdrop, hiding your nervous tremors beneath a fan of ostrich feathers. The backstage bustle is frenetic. Candles gutter, props tumble, and the orchestra tunes to a wavering pitch. You press a gloved hand to your forehead and whisper to the girl rescued from room 7, now recovered and gazing at you with wide, hopeful eyes. Break a leg, you whisper, an irony not lost on either of you. The audience fills the parlor's velvet seats, dukes in jeweled insignias, ladies with lorgnettes held aloft, and a few indiscreet magistrates whose attendance confirms your worst suspicions. The performance begins. You step onto the stage, arches of gilt framing you like a saint encased in glass. Music surges, a haunting melody that tugs at memory and sin alike. You dance through a tableau of desire, sweeping gestures, heartbreak poses, tantalizing pirouettes. Each movement is a pact between you and the thousands of unspoken stories pooling in the audience's gaze. Halfway through, a chandelier trembles. Its brass arms threaten to collapse under the weight of wax candles. You falter for a heartbeat, heart slammed against your ribs, but the orchestra plays on. You recover, spinning like a top until your vision blurs. The seal of that glamorized nightmare hovers in electrified air. One misstep and fame, or infamy, awaits. You finish with a dramatic kneel, chin raised, chest thrust forward, and the room erupts in polite applause. You simmer in the ovation, the clang of silver spoons on saucers echoing through your limbs. Backstage, Madame offers a rare, crooked smile. You are divine, child. Brighton will envy us. She hands you a handful of sovereigns, your share for 4 days' worth of suffering, dancing, and ledger balancing. The coins feel heavy as though each carries a trapped sigh. You tuck them into your corset, knowing they'll buy at best a few days' sustenance in the world beyond these walls. Yet, tonight is far from over. As the last carriage clatters away, the brothel's darkest tradition begins, the collector's rounds. You and the other dancers are herded through hidden passages to private chambers, where exclusive clients hold secret soirees. These rooms are lit by silver sconces and scented with rare oils, an opulent sheen masking desperation. Each client receives a bowed introduction, then slips a secret token, perhaps a signet ring or a blood-stained handkerchief, into your palm. You store these tokens in a velvet pouch, bits of evidence and leverage for days when you'll need to barter favor for escape. By the time the collector's rounds end, you've tallied half a dozen tokens, a diamond-set cufflink, a silk handkerchief embroidered with a royal crest, a ledger of names written in invisible ink. They are the breadcrumbs you'll follow when plotting your exit. You learn to smile sweetly even as exhaustion claws at your bones. Survival demands that you appear eager, grateful, unmoved by both luxury and decay. In the half-light of dawn, the house falls into an uneasy quiet. You descend to your straw mattress for the last time, each breath a battle won. You smooth the bottles of foxglove tea and laudanum from your nightstand. Tomorrow, you'll need them both, one to dull the memory, the other to dull the body if escape goes awry. You close your eyes and images flicker like slide projections. The rescued girl's trembling hand, Betsy's crow-like cackle when she cornered Molly, the magistrate's son gagging on soot, the chandelier's perilous sway. You clutch the cameo brooch from the Blue Blood Society, now pinned inside your bodice, a symbol of solidarity and a talisman against oblivion. Day 5, if you manage to wake, will begin with a forged travel pass stamped by a wink and nod constable, followed by a secret meeting with your silent investor at the Waterman's Wharf. You'll board a small vessel under cover of fog, heading to Brighton's gentler tides. But tonight, you drift between pain and possibility, lulled by exhaustion and the distant echo of laughter in Madame's parlor. As your thoughts unravel, you grasp the final lesson of this Victorian odyssey. Survival is never an individual feat. It's a network of bribes, forged alliances, whispered codes, and stolen moments of grace. You emerge not only bruised and laden with debts, but also armed with secrets and camaraderie potent enough to topple magistrates and tailor your fate. When dawn stretches its pale fingers across London's smog-choked skyline, you will rise, transformed from naive ingénue into a ledger-wielding libertine with a suitcase half full of borrowed courage. You'll step into the world outside this velvet prison, corset still cinching your ribs, but mind unbound by Madame Ruddle's ledgers. And if you look back at the parlor of pleasures as the carriage carries you away, you'll smile knowingly at the gaslit facade, no longer a place of terror, but a crucible that forged you in desperation and absurdity alike. End of Part 4, and the final chapter of your 24-hour fight for freedom in the most unforgiving brothel of Victorian London. Imagine breathing your last breath as a pack of bedbugs feasts on your spine, while your lungs collapse under a corset tighter than a guillotine's noose. And all before your 25th birthday. Welcome to the glamorous mortality rate of Victorian brothel workers. In the flickering gaslight of 19th century London, each dawn brought a new round of patrons, pathogens, and poisoning. But not the kind you'd expect. Sure, there was the clap and consumption lurking in every shadow, but nothing killed faster than starvation dressed up as room and board, or home-brewed medicines concocted by an alchemist half-mad with syphilis. Our heroine, let's call her Clara, arrived at Madame Beaumont's establishment full of rosy hope and dreams of silk petticoats. By sunrise on day 1, she'd traded those petticoats for a moth-eaten chemise, and by week 2, her cheeks had hollowed into the gaunt hollows of impending doom. Clara's mornings began with the ritual of the corset. 16 bone-hard whalebones compressed her organs into a tin can of moral hypocrisy. With every breath sounding like steam escaping an overheated kettle, she gingerly stepped onto the splintered boards, greeting each client with the grace of a saint about to be martyred. Madame Beaumont preached hygiene. "We wash your face thrice daily," she denounced, brandishing a single rag that did double duty wiping the chamber pot and ancient wallpaper. Clara realized quickly that bedbugs tasted foul, but at least they were consistent, unlike the house's promise of 3 square meals, which materialized as stale bread and rancid lard when the pantry was feeling generous. By midday, Clara's co-workers distributed preventative tonics, a blend of foxglove, turpentine, and the tears of pregnant urchins, or so they claimed. A single sip could grant you hours of false vitality or a fatal heart spasm. She once watched Bettina, the house's veteran, gulp a dose and collapse like a marionette with its strings cut. Death here was a spectrum, from the swift collapse of poisoned lungs to the protracted agony of tuberculosis eating you alive. each cough echoing through the halls like a death knell. On the surface, it seemed the greatest threat was disease, but beneath the ornate silk drapes lurked starvation as a weapon. Clara's rations amounted to a thimble of gruel and a sliver of cheese scraped from yesterday's wheel. Every scrap she hoarded felt like contraband, until one night the junior maid discovered her hiding crumbs in her corset. Madame Beaumont ordered Clara to demonstrate her loyalty by surrendering the contraband, then forced her to stomp it into the dirt with her stockinged foot. Hunger gnawed at Clara's joints, turning her knees to jelly and her spine to a brittle reed. But the wickedest poison wasn't brewed in the apothecary's backroom. It came from the very corset that shaped her body into society's ideal. Each tightening session stole her breath and bent her ribs around her chest, compressing her heart until it beat like a trapped mouse. Clara learned to inhale only in shallow sips, trading oxygen for endurance. These breathing haggles left her perpetually lightheaded, collapsing against velvet chaise lounges with dizzy laughter mistaken for coquettish charm. By late afternoon, warding off exhaustion became an art form. The house's refreshments included tea so weak it lacked flavor, and brandy so diluted it couldn't kill a mouse. Clara devised a new game: pocket tiny water droplets from the wash basin to dilute her own painkillers, a risky maneuver that nearly cost her arm when the house doctor mistook the concoction for an overdose. The throbbing in her veins, a cocktail of laudanum and ad hoc potions, blurred the edges of reality. Rats skittered overhead. The walls whispered Clara's failures. At sunset, the true auction began, not of bodies, but of life insurance policies. Madame Beaumont maintained a secret ledger. For each worker, she took out a clandestine burial policy. When Clara fell ill, as everyone inevitably did, the insurance premium paid for her discreet removal and covered the house's losses. Some women joked that dying young was the only way to escape the gutters of Whitechapel. A single coffin cost more than a month's wages, so Madame treated death as a commodity. Clara learned that her mortality was priced at 25 sovereigns, half of which lined the pockets of the undertaker. Nightfall ushered in clients who preferred medical consultations more than carnal pleasures. The house doctor, eyes wild with experimentation, offered painful injections of mercury to cure syphilis, pain so fierce you'd beg for the fever that followed. Clara felt the mercury slosh through her veins, a heavy metal tide claiming her nerves one by one. Fingers curled into claws, her speech turned slurred, but a well-placed groan earned her a floor-side spot by the hearth, a merciful inch of warmth on cold stone. Bedtime was a myth. Instead, Clara perched on a stool beneath dripping pipes, bacteria thriving in each stagnant drop. She tried to memorize every scratch in the wood, markers of her dwindling days, so ghost hunters of tomorrow could map her despair. Sleep, when it came, was punctuated by nightmares of ivory ladles stained crimson, endless rows of brass beds, and a phantom Madame Beaumont tallying souls like commodities. As Clara approached her 20th day in residence, her body resembled a withered fruit. Her cheeks hollowed, her eyes sunken, and gangrene clung to her ankles from untreated cuts. When she finally succumbed to pneumonia, a death sentence for lungs already crushed, her passing warranted no tears. Madame announced her departure in a single sentence: "Another has joined the choir invisible." No funeral, no flourish, just the housekeeping staff wiping away the chamber pot's remnants and cataloging the empty chemise for reuse. Clara's fate was neither unique nor tragic by period standards. It was the expected conclusion of a life commodified. Victorian brothel workers died young because their environment was engineered for decay. Corsets that strangled, diets that starved, medicines that poisoned, and a death insurance ledger that profited from every final breath. Their existence was a cautionary tapestry woven from silk and sorrow, each thread a reminder that in a world obsessed with propriety, it was women like Clara who paid the ultimate price. On day 21, Clara awoke to the metallic tang of her own blood. Another coughing fit had splintered a capillary in her throat. Her reflection in the tarnished mirror was a palimpsest of suffering. Hollow cheeks etched with fever lines, eyes glazed like a baby bird's, and lips cracked into ragged crescents. She lay still for a moment, listening to the staccato drip of the leaky ceiling, and wondered if this grim symphony would be her final lullaby. The morning began with the phantom bath. a single basin of tepid water, barely enough to wash away yesterday's grime, let alone the centuries of filth embedded in the linen walls. Clara dipped a rag in the water and scrubbed her arms, feeling rust flake beneath her fingertips, remnants of collapsed pipes long past repair. She pressed the rag to her face, hoping the water might wash away more than dirt. But the stains of her ordeal ran deeper than any washcloth could reach. Breakfast arrived as a brittle chunk of bread and a cup of mushy porridge so thin you could see through it. As Clara gnawed mechanically, she eyed Madame Beatrice's ledger scrawled in the corner of the ledger room. There, in immaculate copper plate, lay a tally of every body that had passed through the house in the past year, 3 per month on average. Some died so quickly of cholera that their bodies were carted away before the street urchins had a chance to steal their boots. Others lingered for weeks, their hollowed frames whispering secrets to the rats in the cellar. By mid-morning, Clara had learned to hide her deteriorating condition from the clients, but not from the house surgeon, Dr. Pembroke. He was a gaunt man with hawk-like eyes and a penchant for experimental treatments. Today, he escorted her into the back room and produced a syringe filled with opalescent liquid. Morphine, he announced, to ease your cough. She braced herself, recalling how last time he'd injected her so deeply into opium's embrace that she dreamt of her own funeral, complete with a eulogy read by Madame herself. Yet clarity in her delirium had been a mercy. She'd realized how small and disposable she'd become. The syringe stung like a hot poker, and Clara felt the morphine puddle in her veins, softening the edges of pain. She wandered into the courtyard, each step a negotiation between balance and dizziness. A gaggle of pigeons scattered before her, one remained, pecking at a stale biscuit crumb. She knelt, offering it a morsel from her pocket. "Even you, my feathered friend," she whispered, "have more freedom than I." The bird cooed, a taunting serenade for her caged existence. Afternoon brought Madame Beatrice's charity lecture, a stunt to mask the brothel's grim realities. Wealthy donors gathered in the opulent front parlor, draped in satins and pearls, to hear about the house's rehabilitation efforts. Clara was summoned to the stage. She was handed a bouquet of limp flowers and instructed to demonstrate the results of the house's physical therapy program, a series of graceful stretches designed to sell the illusion that brothel work was healthful. In reality, the routines were torture sessions, forced lunges and pirouettes that left Clara's joints grinding like stone on stone. As she bent forward for the final stretch, a sharp pain shot through her spine, but she smiled through it, a brittle mask that concealed the knowledge that her body was breaking. When the lecture concluded, Clara stumbled into the garden, seeking the scented air of the outside world. Instead, she found the graveled courtyard guarded by a locked iron gate. She pressed her palm against the bars as though she could will them open. Nearby, a potted rose bush sputtered under the weight of black soot from the chimney. She plucked a petal and pressed it to her tongue. It tasted of ash and memory. The brief joy of childhood summers washed over her, dissolving as quickly as the petal's color in her mouth. Evening shadows brought the sympathy dinner, a twisted parody of a feast. Platters of boiled cabbage, bruised potatoes, and lukewarm broth were served on chipped china. The high table was reserved for Madame and her favored patrons. The charity cases, like Clara, sat at folding chairs near the kitchen door. Conversation was stifled. No one wanted to discuss the coughing fits or the body count. Instead, they traded wartime stories. Girls who'd survived the Blitz 20 years from now, patriarchs gunned down by suffragettes, or the surgeon who lost his hands to frostbite in the Arctic. These anachronistic tales were distractions, illusions that something worse existed elsewhere, and that Clara's torments were merely local curiosities. After dinner, Clara was ushered into the performance chamber for the nightly show. The parlor's chandeliers glimmered overhead, their light caught in a haze of perfume and tobacco smoke. Tonight's act was a medical demonstration, a dramatized tableau depicting the horrors of untreated disease, with live actors simulating coughing fits and delirium. Clara was to play the dying patient. She lay on a crimson velvet chaise, convulsing on cue, as 2 actors in blood-stained lab coats argued about treatments. The audience gasped, applauded, then filed out, believing they had borne witness to a noble charity rather than paying for another girl's public humiliation. After the performance, a hush enveloped the house. The clientele dispersed, leaving only the staff and the broken survivors. Clara retreated to her cramped quarters, heart pounding from the evening's performance. She traced her fingers over the inked indentations of her bucket, 3 crosses marking days of missed doses of laudanum, an X for the day she collapsed. She counted the crosses, 9. 9 days without the gentle opiate hoist that dulled the ache in her bones. 9 days closer to oblivion. As midnight approached, Clara heard the clandestine whispers of the Blue Rose Society, a secret sisterhood born from the ashes of the Blue Blood Society. They convened tonight in the abandoned attic, a place too low for most to stand, its beams thick with dust and the echoes of forgotten hopes. Drawn by a thread of defiance, Clara joined them. There, she met Maeve, a stocky woman with eyes like wet asphalt, and Elise, whose laugh rang out like shattered glass. They shared a flask of diluted whiskey, passing it around in defiance of Madame's bans. Maeve spoke first. "We can't let another girl die without a voice." Elise nodded, lifting her glass. "We'll smuggle letters out to reformers, expose the horrors, and demand change." Clara's heart thundered at the thought. She had no illusions about reformers. They were distant gentlemen with quills and spectacles, safe behind their parliament walls. But perhaps their outrage, once fueled by truth, could ignite a blaze. Together, they penned a letter in shaky script, detailing the starvation rations, the lethal corsets, the house surgeon's poisons, and the insurance ledger that commodified their deaths. Clara's hand trembled as she wrote her name, C. Dawson, on the bottom, a testament that she had lived, suffered, and demanded justice. With the letter sealed in a creased envelope, they devised a plan to smuggle it out via the groundskeeper's son, a boy too young to understand the magnitude of his task. He was paid in biscuits and silver gleaming with tears. Clara kissed his forehead, whispering, "Deliver this to a man called Mr. Fairchild. He'll know what to do." The boy vanished into the moonlit streets, leaving Clara with a mixture of hope and terror knotting her stomach. Dawn's first light found Clara once more at the window, watching the fog roll over the rooftops. Her body felt heavier than the night before. The morphine had worn off. The pneumonia's chill rattled her bones, and the rose petal's memory had faded into the mundane gray. Yet in her sleeve pocket lay the envelope, a fragile beacon in a world designed to extinguish it. She pressed her fingers to the envelope's soft paper, willing it to carry her whispered rebuke to the seats of power. When Madame Beatrice appeared at her door, baton in hand, Clara inhaled sharply. "Up and at 'em," Madame croaked, a voice syrupy with morning decay. "A new client waits, fresh from the continent. The Empress herself, they say." Clara's heart sank at the thought of French nobility's scrutiny, but she straightened her spine and donned the riddled corset. Each breath was an act of protest, each step a motion toward reclaiming what little agency she had left. As Clara descended the stairs, she paused to glance at her reflection one last time. Her face was astonishing in its gaunt beauty, cheekbones sculpted by pain, eyes luminous with defiance, lips curved in an ironic smirk that said, "I may die young, but I will not die silent." And with that, she stepped into the brothel's maw, ready to perform once more for a world that profited from her slow demise, but unaware that her final act would be not one of surrender, but of unwavering resistance. By the 29th day, Clara's body had become a ledger of injuries, each bruise and cut meticulously recorded by her mind in a desperate bid for self-preservation. Her ribs, still bent from that first corset fitting, throbbed in time with her hollow coughs. Most days she felt more phantom than woman, an echo in Madame Beaumont's marble halls, skirting the edges of life and death with every step. Today would test the limits of her endurance, an afternoon of enrichment lessons, followed by an evening of therapeutic diversions, and a midnight inspection that could mean rescue or ruin. Morning began with Madame's latest scheme, the etiquette workshop. Clara and 2 fellow survivors were ushered into the front parlor, where gilt mirrors and silk drapes attempted to mask the building's centuries of neglect. A mustachioed tutor named Mr. Hawthorne paced before them, cradling a pocket watch and a volume of continental manners. "Posture, ladies," he intoned, voice as brittle as stale biscotti. "Your carriage must convey both humility and artistry." A slight tilt of the head, a gentle bend at the wrist. These are the hallmarks of a true Victorian gentlewoman. Clara forced her spine into a regal arc, despite the protest of splintered ribs. Toy teacups were offered and snatched away, replaced with heavy porcelain saucers she was to balance atop her palm. Across the room, another girl's bony wrist collapsed beneath the weight, sending the saucer crashing into the tutor's polished boots. He barked, "Again!" Perfection is not optional. The lesson dragged on until Clara's shoulders felt as though they'd been hammered by the parish smithy, and her lungs protested each forced inhale under her corset's relentless squeeze. By midday, her quivering arms and gasping breath were redeemed with a single sliver of stale sponge cake, an act of mercy meant to illustrate the reward of self-discipline. She took a tentative bite, dry, flavorless, but enough to dull the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. Her compatriots exchanged resigned glances. They knew well that this sugar dust reprieve came at a price. Each crumb was paid for with extra hours of scrubbing, extra tightening of stays, extra whispers of warning that one misstep meant the cat on 9 tails in the cellar. Afternoon ushered in the therapeutic diversions, a euphemism for group therapy led by Dr. Pembroke's disciple, a soft-spoken philologist named Miss Sinclair. The women gathered in a back chamber thick with lavender oil and dust, an attempt at aromatherapy that only served to aggravate Clara's allergies. Each was handed a quill and ink pot, instructed to journal their emotional state, as they would trace florid letters across parchment. Clara's script was a jagged scrawl. My lungs are filigreed with fire. My mind unravels at each cough. I mourn the shape of my own reflection. Miss Sinclair read snippets aloud, nodding as though moved by genuine compassion. But Madame Beaumont hovered at the door, ledger in hand, noting names beside tally marks. Each candid confession was tallied as another episode of emotional expenditure, later deducted from their meager earnings. Clara realized these so-called therapeutic diversions were yet another experiment in exploitation, forced catharsis for the benefit of a household profit margin. As twilight crept through the grimy windows, Clara was sent to the rehabilitation baths, a stone trough filled with tepid water and handfuls of Epsom salts said to draw out impurities. In practice, the salt stung fresh cuts and open sores like shards of glass. Rusty pipes dripped overhead, each drop a stark reminder that this was no spa but a hospital ward in waiting. The tub's brittle wooden bench creaked beneath her. She sank to her knees, fingers trailing through the murky water, conjuring memories of childhood baths warm enough to sing in. Tears joined the bathwater, indistinguishable from the grime clinging to her skin. Dinner, when it came, was a hollow parody of nourishment, a stew of cabbage leaves boiled to pulp, flecked with bits of turnip. She ate mechanically, eyes on the tapestry-backed walls depicting Versailles in the age of Marie Antoinette, a world so distant it felt like a fairy tale. Beside her, Gwen, a girl whose cough rattled like a maraca, whispered morbid jokes about the house's burial insurance. "I hear Madame once charged double for a pneumonia case," she rasped, voice thick with phlegm. Clara forced a laugh, though the taste of rot lingered on her tongue. The late hours brought Clara's greatest dread, the midnight inspection. At exactly 11:45 p.m., the house physician and 2 constables would roam the corridors, searching for illicit behaviors, hoarding food, conspiring with reformers, dabbling in forbidden reading. The penalty for non-compliance ranged from solitary confinement in a damp cell to physical punishment in the basement's shadowy recesses. Tonight, Clara was certain her scribbled letter, entrusted to the groundskeeper's son, had been discovered. She flattened her back against her door, breath trapped behind her ribs, praying for silence. The footsteps began, a slow, deliberate tread on the cracked floorboards. First the physician, whipcord gait echoing through the hall. Then the constables, lamp flames wobbling as they passed each door. Clara held her breath while Gwen, sharing the room, feigned sleep, head lolling onto her chest. The inspector's lantern light flickered across the room, illuminating Clara's pale fingers pressed against the door's wood grain. He paused, sniffed. "Smells like rebellion or mold?" He grunted and moved on. Once their march faded, Clara collapsed amid the thin straw mattress, shivering with relief and dread in equal measure. Night bled into pre-dawn, and Clara's mind drifted among half-formed dreams. She recalled the boy who'd carried her letter and wondered if he'd faltered. In her dream, she saw Miss Sinclair reading the missive aloud in Parliament, senators recoiling, laws bending toward mercy. Waking, she found her cheek wet with tears, part grief, part hope. The letter remained in her pocket, intact. It was her only lifeline. Morning dawned bleary. Clara forced her aching frame upright and prepared for the day's final ordeal. The grand auction of favors. This quarterly event drew the household's most influential patrons who bid on exclusive experiences, private dinners, masquerade, performances, or a single night's companionship with a favored courtesan. Proceeds were split 3 ways: Madame's coffers, the house's maintenance fund, and a token amount reserved for the girls. Participation was mandatory. Refusal branded one as defiant and risked banishment. Clara was paraded before the glittering crowd, her gaunt figure draped in a borrowed silk gown the wrong shade of rose. An auctioneer, resplendent in tailcoat and cravat, spun elaborate descriptions of her unique charms, resilience in the face of adversity, a tragic beauty carved by hardship, the exotic allure of her cough. Bids began at 2 sovereigns and climbed incrementally. Clara's heart pounded as she gauged the men's interest. A minister of finance, a shipping magnate, and a diplomat rumored to traffic in stolen antiquities. When the final hammer fell, Clara's fate was sealed. The diplomat won her favor for a night of political discourse. Relief flickered through her. At least she would be sheltered from the horrors of Madame's house for a few hours. Yet dread intertwined with gratitude. She braced herself for the diplomat's scrutiny, fearing that behind his cultured veneer lay darker appetites. The diplomat's chamber was lavish: Turkish carpets, porcelain vases, and a fireplace still warm from earlier use. He greeted Clara with polite bows and a courteous inquiry about her well-being. Questions she had grown to loathe. She masked her wheezing cough with a delicate cough drop, smothering her own discomfort. Over tea, he posed questions about her dreams, her ambitions, absurd queries in a world where her only ambition was survival. Clara answered with practiced elegance, each word a shield to conceal her fragile reality. At midnight, the diplomat escorted her to his carriage, paying Madame's retainer with an appreciative nod. As the carriage rattled through London's alleys, Clara pressed her palm to the window, watching gas lamps blur into streaks of gold. For a fleeting moment, she felt free. Free from corset, free from suffocating walls, free from the calculus of life and death that governed Madame's brood. She exhaled deeply, allowing herself a sigh of relief she hadn't felt in weeks. When she returned at dawn, the brothel's silhouette against the gray sky looked less like a place of demise and more like a fortress she'd briefly besieged. Clara rose before the other girls, slipping into her chemise before Madame's morning inspection. Her body was battered, but her spirit, though frayed, carried the ember of resistance. She dipped her hand into her pocket, fingertips brushing the envelope that held her truth. By the end of day 30, Clara had seen the full spectrum of exploitation: psychological torment, physical agony, financial entrapment, and social invisibility. Yet she had also discovered solidarity in stolen moments of rebellion, and daring hope in the simple act of writing. As she prepared for sleep on that final night, she pressed the envelope to her chest, whispering, "May this letter live longer than I." Tomorrow, whether her lungs gave out or her courage saw her through, Clara knew she had done more than survive. She had borne witness, and in bearing witness, claimed a sliver of immortality beyond the velvet drapes and gaslit halls. And that, she realized with a fierce clarity, was worth any price. By the 31st dawn, Clara felt every breath as though her lungs were lined with barbed wire. And yet she rose, determined to see her final plan to its bitter end. Today would be the reckoning. The letter she'd helplessly entrusted to the groundskeeper's boy arrives in Parliament. A tidal wave of shame and outrage is unleashed, and Clara braces herself for the fallout as surely as she's braced against slipping, corsets, and the surgeon's syringe. Morning light found her seated at the rickety kitchen table, the envelope still pressed between her fingers like a talisman. She watched the door expectantly, heart hammering against bone. When the boy slipped in, eyes wide, coat sleeves muddied, Clara snatched the letter from him. He stammered, Sir Fairchild himself personally thanked me. Parliament's in uproar, they say. Clara tore the seal and read the scrawled words of solidarity and fury. 3 MPs calling for an inquiry into brothel conditions, 2 newspapers demanding immediate reforms to wage unfairness, punitive corsetry, and lethal medical treatments. 1 reformist peer threatening to stall the entire session until action was taken. She trembled, not from cold, but from the realization that her whispered rebellion had become a roar. Around that same moment, the front parlor's bells tolled, summoning every worker to Madame Beatrice's drawing room. Clara steadied herself, stepping into the corridor with the coffin-tight corset as usual, thoughts swimming with equal measures of triumph and dread. Madame Beatrice, coiffed in ash-white tresses and even paler cheek paint, greeted the girls with an unusually grave expression. The parlor's clients, hastily summoned, sat stiff in gilt chairs, murmuring among themselves. A delegation of constables stood watch by the door, blinking at the ornate wainscoting in confusion. Behind a floral screen, the house surgeon clutched his medical bag like a true criminal awaiting judgment. Madame cleared her throat. Ladies, you have served this establishment with distinction, but the realm demands answers. Questions of hygiene, diet, and humane treatment have been raised in the highest circles. She swept her gaze across the assembled women. Effective immediately, new regulations are in effect. You will receive 2 hearty meals daily, gruel thick enough to sustain life without a rationalizing starvation. Corsets will be worn loosely, with a 2-inch allowance to allow proper respiration. Gasps fluttered like moths against candle flame. The house surgeon paled as his syringes were confiscated and dumped into a puddle of bleach. The constables advanced, auditing ledgers and tearing out pages marked insurance premiums, death payout. Clients shifted uneasily, no longer assured that their dalliance with disease-ridden ladies would remain clandestine. For Clara, the moment was surreal. The very edifice built on suffering was trembling. She exchanged stunned looks with Gwen and Maeve, dissidents turned accidental champions of reform. A single stain on the brothel's immaculate facade had corroded its foundations. By afternoon, Clara found herself in Madame's old office, appointed as the house's new welfare mistress. A title faintly absurd, but one that granted her the power to enforce the new rules. She catalogued meal schedules, arranged safe harbor medical visits, for treatment, not experimentation, and oversaw the distribution of comfortable undergarments to replace the whalebone corsets. She even established a rest hour each afternoon, a 45-minute reprieve from solicitations and scrub brushes. Word spread, the parlor of pleasures would no longer be a tomb disguised as a salon. In its place rose a brothel that, however paradoxical, offered genuine care for its workers' bodies. Though the stigma remained, and the clients only grudgingly tipped pennies on the change table, the girls breathed deeper than they had in years. That evening, Clara slipped away from the gilded halls to the attic one last time, where the Blue Rose Society had become its own secret union. They toasted the victories, a fund for medical care, an emergency sick leave policy, and most revolutionary of all, a guarantee that no girl would ever face cold stone or lethal potion without recourse. They pinned a blue rose, hand-stitched from Clara's own chemise, onto their lapels. Clara's chest swelled with pride and fatigue. Her body, still ravaged by months of abuse, was a battlefield scarred and bruised, but her spirit soared on the wings of change. She whispered a farewell to the attic's dusty rafters and descended to the courtyard, where the city's fog clung like second skin. As the moon rose, she slipped into the back alley toward the river. A small skiff awaited, borrowed from a friendly dockhand whose niece had once worked in the parlor. He helped her aboard. She paid him with the last sovereigns in her pouch, hard-won coins that had once been earmarked for an undertaker's fee. Now they purchased her freedom. The boat drifted silently under the arches of London Bridge. Clara leaned over the side, watching ripples of lamplight and wondering if her body would ever heal. She carried with her a satchel, letters of commendation from sympathetic peers, a small stipend for new clothes, and a modest sum earmarked for travel to Brighton, where Miss Constance's new house had opened and where rumors promised a gentler tide. Behind her, the parlor of pleasures gleamed with gaslight and tempered hope. Clara closed her eyes, imagining the next generation of girls stepping across that threshold, No longer pale wraiths condemned to perish young, but workers with rights, wages, and days free of lethal corsets. When she finally disembarked at the Brighton pier, Clara's legs trembled under the weight of possibility. She paid a visit to Madame Constance, delivering the Blue Rose Society's charter and securing a position as conditions overseer, a role both novel and necessary. Madame Constance, eyes bright and determined, embraced her. Together we'll ensure no woman here meets the same fate. In the years that followed, Clara's name, once invisible, became whispered in reform circles and printed in pamphlets demanding humane treatment across England's shadowed houses. She lived to see laws passed limiting occupational hazards in sex work, mandating meal provisions, regulating corset tightness, and outlawing medical experimentation without consent. Her cough, though never fully gone, became a reminder of battles fought, not a death sentence. Clara died at 60 of natural causes, a peaceful departure in a sunlit room, wrapped in soft linen. On her bedside table lay the final blue rose brooch, pressed beneath glass, and a single sovereign, a token of the girl she'd once been, who paid the ultimate price to buy life for women everywhere. And that, dear viewer, is why most Victorian brothel workers died young. They endured a cocktail of starvation, asphyxiation, infection, and exploitation, an industrial-scale neglect fueled by profit. But it only takes one letter, one blue rose, and one iron will to rewrite injustice. So when you dim the lights, turn on that fan, and remember Clara's journey. Know that even in the darkest gaslit corridors of history, hope can be forged in broken bones and whispered defiance. Picture yourself tiptoeing down a shadowy Georgian alley, candle in one hand, purse in the other, and discovering a world where powdered wigs hide whispered debts, silk stockings conceal hidden blades, and every curtained doorway leads you into a labyrinth of secrets stitched with lace and liquor. Welcome to the hidden underbelly of 18th century brothels. The moment you slip past the discreet sign, Madame Thackeray's discreet house of amiable company, you're swallowed by a hush so profound it amplifies the soft scrape of your shoes on polished oak floors. Gas lamps flicker like watchful eyes, revealing halls hung with heavy tapestries so thick they swallow overheard gossip. The air tastes faintly of rosewater, stale ale, and a pinch of danger. You, an unsuspecting traveler hungry for scandal, have just crossed into a realm where survival depends on more than a quick tongue and a sharp wit. Your guide, a courtly rake named Jasper Withers, greets you at the threshold. He's clad in a frock coat of sapphire velvet, lace cravat tucked meticulously at his throat, and a walking cane rumored to conceal a slender rapier. With a bow so deep it strains his stock, he murmurs, "Welcome to our little sanctuary of flesh and folly." His grin reveals one gold-capped tooth, an investment from Madame herself, who insists her elite clientele must always leave a mark. Jasper's eyes glint as he steers you past crimson curtains into the inner sanctum. Here, the first truth strikes you. Brothels in the 1700s weren't mere dens of decadence. They were miniature societies unto themselves. Each inmate, as the madam called her girls, possessed a distinct title: Lady Emerald, Madame Ophelia, Countess Marigold, and an intricate survival manual scribbled in her mind. You watch as Lady Emerald, draped in emerald green satin that hugs every curve, greets a hush-mouthed physician promising bloodletting with discretion. She curtsies, whispering, "Good evening, doctor. I trust your lancets are well sterilized." His stiff bow falters. Sterilization was a concept for apothecaries, not gentlemen of the scalpel. Within moments you learn the house's lifeblood is currency far beyond coin, information. A blackout in Whitehall? A secret liaison between the Prince of Wales and a Duchess's maid? These whispers were traded like precious metals, smuggled within embroidered pouches sewn into corset linings. Lady Ophelia, your next docent, slides by, her skirts brushing polished floorboards. In one gloved hand she carries a quill and ledger, in the other a gilded ring plucked from a tipsy baron's pocket. "We're historians of impropriety," she purrs. Every confession, every stolen glance, it all adds to our power. As you're guided deeper, you notice the house's architecture hides secrets beneath its sumptuous facade. A hidden staircase behind a velvet curtain spirals downward into vaulted wine cellars, where illicit rendezvous blend with smuggled brandy barrels. Beyond, a bewildering array of locked doors, each with its own key, entrances to private chambers, rented by diplomats wanting absolute discretion. Madame Thackeray's office, you overhear, contains a huge chest of letters of introduction and blackmail dossiers on half of London's elite. Your tour pauses at the Rose Garden, an irony-laced chamber lined with silk cushions and sweet-scented blossoms. It's a place of reprieve where favored clients can enjoy garden tea and private performance by the house's resident harpist. You taste the delicate infusion, jasmine petals strewn among sugar crystals, so potent that a single sip loosens lips and pours out secrets. Viscount Beaumont leans in for a confidential whisper. I overheard the Prime Minister's affair rumors in Versailles. He laps the tea with enthusiasm, unaware it's laced with a mild soporific. Madame's method for ensuring tips and compliments flow freely. You begin to see why most brothels were as much political theaters as pleasure houses. Diplomatic backchannels thrived here, secret letters slipped into lace fans, treaties negotiated between silk-gloved fingers, alliances hatched behind perfumed doors. One client, a French envoy, traded a clause on a trade embargo in exchange for a private evening with Countess Marigold. Next door, a British MP exchanged intel on naval movements for an after-hours rendezvous guaranteed to leave him numb with desire and indebted for life. Between these meetings, the women were more than passive hostesses. They were trained observers, social chameleons fluent in court decorum, capable of adapting accents and mannerisms on a whim. In one corner, Miss Delacroix demonstrates the continental French dialect, accented R's and languid vowels, to entertain the Marquis de Folliot. In another, young Emily Ravenwood rehearses a scene from Congreve's plays, her coquettish wit finely honed to provoke admiration and generous gratuities. Each performance was a calculated gamble. A perfect accent might net a diamond ring. A flawed one could earn harsh lectures reserved for amateurs. Lunchtime at Madame's house is a spectacle in itself. The dining hall's long mahogany table groans under porcelain platters of poached pheasant, sugar-glazed apples, and gold-flecked petit fours imported from France. Yet the women eat sparingly, a delicate nibble here, a polite sip of claret there, while watching for cues of favor. The real sustenance is social positioning. If a madame spots a baron gesturing toward you, she might stage a minor accident, spilling a sliver of tear gas-like perfume so the rival girl appears less desirable. This silent warfare ensures hierarchy within the walls remains as nuanced as any aristocratic court. By afternoon, you're led to the apprentice parlor, where the novices undergo their baptism by fire. These young curious souls, no older than 14 or 15, are taught essential skills: how to flirt without showing teeth, the precise angle to sip from a satin-rimmed teacup, and the art of misdirection when a client grows too inquisitive. One instructor, a weathered veteran named Mrs. Bracken, smacks a porcelain doll for demonstrating the wrong posture, an ironic punishment that teaches them the grave importance of stillness and propriety. The lessons are brutal yet elegant, reflex drills and curtsying, whispered lessons in French idioms, and masterclasses on maintaining a pale complexion when your heart begs for color. But alongside artistry and espionage lies grime and peril. The Inferno Room, as the women call the damp basement turned infirmary, is where broken bodies and bruised souls gather. Here, a succession of quacks administer dubious remedies: mercury salves to cure venereal disease, powdered rhubarb doses to induce strenuous purges, and leech regimens that leave rosettes of welts fresh on the skin. You peer through a slit in the door and see a line of chairs, each occupied by a woman whose face has lost its bloom. A young girl sobs softly, clutching a handkerchief spun with the pattern of a Tudor rose, likely a token from a noble lover gone cold. Yet even in sickness, life pulses with absurd humor. One courageous courtesan, Betsy Blush Carlyle, greets her leech-ridden arm with a wink. "Fancy a nibble, old friend?" She plucks the leech off and tosses it into a tin pail with the nonchalance of tossing out rotten fruit. Her laughter echoes in the dank chamber, a defiant spark of resilience amid medicinal horrors. By dusk, the brothel transforms once more. Curtains are drawn, candles lit in hurricane lamps, and orchestral notes slither from a painted harpsichord. The evening's main event, the Masquerade of Masks, commences. Clients don elaborate Venetian masks, intent on obscuring identity and unleashing clandestine desires. Each mask bears a cryptic symbol, an ivy vine, a broken sword, a weeping cherub, revealing secret codes known only within these walls. Julia, the mask mistress, checks each guest's mask against her ledger of forbidden and permitted women. A slip could unleash ruin. A talkative client might reveal state secrets. A licentious aristocrat might betray his lineage in drunken boasting. So masks become both protection and threat. On stage, the women perform an entrancing pantomime of Romeo and Juliet's balcony scene, drenched in candlelight and longing. Their gestures, an outstretched hand, a fleeting glance, carry the weight of tragedy and desire. Clients murmur, coins clink, and the women's laughter, soft and knowing, sells fantasies while concealing the sharp realities lurking beneath polished smiles. As midnight approaches, you realize this hidden world thrives on paradox. Elegance born of exploitation, freedom shackled by secrecy, and solidarity forged in whispered alliances. Madame Thackeray herself emerges from her private salon, draped in ivory lace and wearing a necklace of black freshwater pearls. One for each decade she survived this trade. She raises a silver goblet. To us, she toasts, the true keepers of London's secrets. The women echo her salute, their glasses touch with a brittle ring that resounds like destiny knocking on the door. And so concludes the first act of our 18th century brothel odyssey, a world of gilded opulence and whispered betrayals, of political intrigue and bodily peril, of resilience in the face of cynicism. In part 2, we will delve deeper into the clandestine alliances that bound these women, the underground networks that defied magistrates, and the hidden economies of favors and blackmail that kept the House of Amiable Company afloat. But for now, hold on to the echo of that final toast, and remember, behind every mask lies a story waiting to be told. The moment the candle flames guttered low on the silver sconces, the House of Amiable Company revealed its second skin, a web of clandestine alliances and covert economies that pulsed beneath the velvet drapes. In the hush, after the masquerade of masks, Lady Ophelia gathered her inner circle in the hidden parlor, accessible only through a secret panel, behind a bookshelf brimming with scandalous pamphlets. The panel swung open with a whisper. Inside, velvet cushions ringed a low mahogany table scrawled with cryptic notations, names, dates, and sums owed in coin or in silence. Lady Ophelia, her hair streaked with the first hints of silver despite her youth, tapped a gloved finger on a faded map of London's underbelly. "Our strength lies in networks," she declared, voice soft as powdered silk. "Not just within these walls, but across the city's hidden veins. We trade secrets for safe passage, rumors for refuge." Around her sat 5 confidants, Betsy Blush, whose leech-scarred arms disguised her razor-sharp mind, Madame Selwyn, exiled from a noble court for whispered treason, the cunning Mrs. Bracken, whose porcelain dolls doubled as message couriers, young Emily Ravenwood, recently initiated but already fluent in coded verse, and Jasper Withers himself, whose gilt-toothed grin concealed debts to merchants far more dangerous than any constable. Their first order of business, solidifying a network of witnesses, housemaids, stable boys, and chimney sweeps strategically positioned to intercept letters or overhear incriminating conversations. Mrs. Bracken produced a delicate fan embroidered with tiny bells. Each bell's tinkle signaled a visitor's approach and masked the rustle of contraband dispatches. The sweep, known only as Dusty Tom, would toll the bells 3 times when a courier passed his corner of Cornhill Alley. A battered stable hand named Marcus pledged his loyalty in exchange for discreet payment, silver sovereigns hidden inside hay bales destined for Madame's coach horses. Next, they tackled the economy of favors. A promise of influence yields more than mere coin, Betsy Blush observed, propping her bruised wrist on a cushion. When Lord Chamberlain leans on us for court gossip, we demand appointments at his sister's adoptive home. A single night's tale from Countess Marigold could secure an audience for one of our own. Thus, a secret ledger was begun. Entries not of pounds and shillings, but of obligations. A future performance at Bath in exchange for a recommendation. Safe. Harbor in Bristol for a sick girl in return for naval intelligence. a promise to host the Archbishop's nephew's secret liaison with an opera singer, leveraged later to free one of their apprentices from debt bondage. Then came the most delicate operation, coordinating with the Society for the Reformation of Manners, a group of moral crusaders known for publishing lurid exposés. To harness their zeal, Emily Ravenwood offered herself as author of a pamphlet titled The Lustful Labyrinth, Confessions from Within a Brothel's Walls. Under a pseudonym, she sketched vivid sketches of painted faces and poisoned tonics, ensuring sensational headlines. Betsy provided the grimmest anecdotes, mercury-poisoned tongues, corset-crushed ribs, while Jasper's ledger of high-born clients lent authenticity. Once printed at a clandestine press in Clerkenwell, copies would find their way to coffeehouses and manuscript circles, forcing magistrates to investigate conditions too sordid to ignore. Amid these grand schemes, the women sustained a quieter resistance, a health guild dedicated to clandestine medical care. In the candlelit corner of the infirmary, they stored jars of rose hip syrup against scurvy, bundles of dried rosemary to stave off infection, and tinctures of willow bark for pain relief, an ironic nod to future aspirin. When the surgeon's apprentice doled out mercury or branded red-hot irons, the health guild countered with gentle remedies hidden in tea caddies. Each girl carried a hidden sachet sewn into her shift, a single dose of chamomile or lavender oil, ready to calm fevered brow or soothe a rattling cough. Their alliances extended beyond London's gates. Through a connection Jasper had procured at a gambling den near Whitechapel, they traded letters with a network of Bath spa owners who sympathized with any woman fleeing exploitation. These spa owners, some disreputable, others quietly philanthropic, offered refuge for courtesans retired from the trade under the guise of convalescence. In return, the Bath establishments received Bristol Harbor intelligence, alerts on French privateers, and on occasion, the performances of Emily Ravenwood, whose voice carried the haunting lilt of evening dew. Thus, a covert escape route emerged. A brothel worker in danger could slip north to Bristol, then onward to Bath, disguised as a recuperating invalid, before vanishing into the country's genteel retreats. Not all alliances were benign. Some were alliances of necessity with the underworld's darker elements. A notorious fence named Silas Crowley handled stolen jewels and blackmail trinkets, trading safe-cracking services for information on unruly clients. When a particularly violent peer threatened to expose silent partners in the House of Lords, Crowley orchestrated a burglary of his London townhouse, ensuring the incriminating letters were stolen, leaving behind a staged scene of chaos. In return, he requested only a share of the jewels he facilitated and the promise of sanctuary whenever the king's men knocked on his door. The women paid in stolen cufflinks and rings. Silas delivered with ruthless efficiency. While these covert economies flourished, the house's internal hierarchy remained a mosaic of fragile loyalties. Madame Thackeray, ever vigilant, suspected nothing, her days consumed by maintaining appearances for aristocratic benefactors and her nights lost in opium's haze to endure the stress. The inner circle exploited her complacency, feeding her carefully curated reports of increased profits and improved health among the girls. When she boasted of the house's growing reputation, the conspirators smiled privately, knowing the house's true foundation was built on secrets far more valuable than any coin. The covert evening meetings continued in rotating safe houses, a retired parlor on Limehouse Reach, the back room of a cobbler near St. Catherine's Dock, and the rooftop of a disused warehouse in Spitalfields. Each location was chosen for its strategic advantages: sea breezes to carry messages wrapped in waterproof parchment, hidden compartments beneath floorboards, or quick egress to waiting riverboats. At each gathering, they exchanged updates. The Bath network was ready to evacuate 2 girls next week. The pamphlet had sold out 4,000 copies in 3 days. Lord Chamberlain's sister had offered a discreet introduction for Emily Ravenwood at court. As winter's chill crept along the Thames, the circle devised its boldest move yet, forging new identities for those seeking escape. Using inks concocted by Mrs. Bracken, indelible pigments created from walnut husks and candle soot, they produced forged baptismal certificates, marriage licenses, and letters of introduction on aristocratic letterheads. A traveling seamstress's uniform and a trunk of tools provided cover for a group fleeing to Scotland. when a small cohort of 8 women slipped away in a pallet-laden barge bound for Edinburgh. They carried with them the house's blessing and the promise of new lives in a land unfamiliar enough to conceal their pasts. Yet for all their successes, the hidden world remained perilous. The night the Society for the Reformation of Manners published Emily's pamphlet, a squad of constables, tipped off by an anonymous subscriber, battered down the house's front door at dawn. Madame Thackeray, roused from opium-fogged slumber, was coerced into producing her ledgers. The inner circle had counted on this possibility. A contingency plan was in place. Hidden compartments released false ledgers filled with innocuous names and sheepish tradesmen. The real ledger, cataloging alliances, debts, and blackmail holdings, was secreted away in a sealed tin buried beneath the floor of the main parlor. When the constables departed, barking angrily about lost time and bureaucratic red tape, the house exhaled collectively. Madame Thackeray, unaware of the sleight of hand, believed her empire had survived a minor scandal. The conspirators celebrated with fortified claret in the hidden parlor, toasting to the resilience of their network. Let them seize goats, Jasper Withers toasted, for ghosts lack hands to choke us. Betsy Blush raised her glass, winking, and ghosts can't squeal. As January's frost gave way to February's tentative thaw, the covert operation settled into a new normal. The pamphlet's fallout had triggered parliamentary hearings, and new legislation was proposed to regulate brothel conditions, though the House of Lords begrudgingly exempted establishments deemed private parlors from onerous inspections. Lady Ophelia wrote to sympathetic MPs, offering first-hand testimony in exchange for amendments requiring weekly safety inspections and basic medical provisions. The Society for the Reformation of Manners, having tasted scandalous truth, quietly endorsed these measures while the Bath spa owners pledged to accept any displaced worker under the guise of health retreats. Through it all, the women maintained their wry sense of absurdity. March brought the annual Flower Ball, a glittering event hosted by the Earl of Wexford at his Mayfair mansion. The House of Amiable Company was invited to perform an overture of pastoral scenes, complete with shepherdesses and faux sheep. Lady Emerald choreographed the dance, a satire of aristocratic idleness, complete with a mock sheep that ate bits of paper listing the Earl's debts. The performance caused uproarious laughter among guests, while palace aides exchanged nervous glances, realizing that even a brothel's wit could outstrip their own pomp. As spring's first crocuses emerged through the cold earth, the hidden world of 18th century brothels had evolved into a dynamic ecosystem, one where power flowed from whispered rumors as readily as from gold sovereigns, where alliances were as vital as medicines, and where survival demanded cunning equal to any courtier's diplomacy. The House of Amiable Company stood transformed, no longer merely a den of carnal pleasure, but a crucible forging women into masters of intrigue, espionage, and economic independence. And yet, despite their triumphs, each conspirator knew the game was never truly won. New threats always lurked, overzealous reformers demanding public executions, rival parlor owners seeking to poach talent, foreign agents eager to manipulate intelligence for war. In the cracks between candlelight and morning dew, they remained vigilant, sharpening quills as deftly as rasps, plotting escapes as carefully as choreography, and trading secrets in the hushed corners of London's labyrinth. Thus closes part 2 of our journey into the hidden world of 18th century brothels, where every curtained doorway concealed both danger and opportunity, and where survival was an art form of shadows and whispers. In part 3, we will explore the personal odysseys of the house's most legendary figures, their triumphs and downfalls, betrayals and redemptions, and reveal how these women rewrote the rules of power in a world determined to silence them. Stay tuned and keep your senses sharp, for in this realm, nothing is ever as it seems. The candlelight in Madame Thackeray's hidden parlor danced like wraiths on the damask walls as Lady Emerald leaned forward, voice low and wry. "They call me Emerald for my gown," she began, "but I earned that name the night I filched half a treasure chest from a drunken Portuguese marquess." She paused, glancing at the small circle of women who'd gathered to hear her tale. He'd been boasting of a voyage to Goa, clutching that chest like a drowning man clings to driftwood. I simply unhooked it from his trembling fingers and slipped away into the fog. By morning, his accountants discovered the loss, and the Marquis blamed smugglers. No one suspected the silk-draped ghost named Emerald Betsy. Blush Carlyle snorted. Her leech-scarred wrists crossed dramatically. "Impressive," she said, "but let me tell you about the night I outfoxed Bishop Aldworth." The parlor fell silent. Lady Ophelia set down her half-empty teacup. Even Jasper Withers straightened, curiosity piqued. Betsy continued. "Aldworth came seeking absolution. Claimed he'd preyed on one of our apprentices and wanted forgiveness. I agreed to hear his confession, but only if he first pledged to free the girl and provide for her dowry. He insisted he was above earthly contracts, so I had his valet deliver a signed bond, penned in his own trembling hand. When Aldworth returned, I bound him to the bond and to silence. He paid the girl's dowry in gold and never returned." She smirked. "They say the church has yet to reconcile that donation." Next came Emily Ravenwood, perched on a velvet cushion with a leather-bound book in her lap. "I nearly lost my voice to that performance in Bath," she admitted softly, "but I gained my greatest ally, Lady Henrietta Faraday." Emily told how, during the flower ball at Wexford House, her satirical dance so mortified the Duke that he stormed out, vowing never to sponsor such insolence. That night, as Emily packed her trunk, she found a letter sealed with Faraday's crest, an invitation to perform privately at the Duchess's summer pavilion, and a promise of patronage that granted Emily a small annuity for life. One pirouette, Emily concluded with a flourish, and I had my freedom. Madame Selwyn, draped in black lace and exuding quiet gravitas, then spoke of her own exile from the French court. "I was a favorite of Louis's brother," she said, voice heavy with memory, "until a treasonous poem found its way into the prince's hands, scandalous verses mocking his war council decisions. Naturally, I was banished, but I kept a copy of that poem hidden in my bodice. Years later in London, it resurfaced, sold to a publisher who thought it ancient satire. It made me famous, even revered, and brought readers to our door hungry to taste treason." She smiled, a ghost of regret in her eyes. "I traded my exile for notoriety. As each woman shared her story, a pattern emerged. Every triumph was forged in betrayal or redemption. The very skills that lulled clients, grace, wit, secrecy, became weapons in the struggle for autonomy. But not all tales ended in victory. Mrs. Bracken, whose porcelain dolls had once spelled freedom for many, recounted her greatest failure with a tremor in her voice. My dearest apprentice Rosamond vanished one night with a forged passage to Dublin. I believed the plan sound, yet I never heard from her again. Rumor says she was sold onward, moved from parlor to dungeon, until she perished in some god-forsaken den. I still see her doll, arms broken, dust cloaked in my attic." She paused, collecting herself. "Her ghost taught me that even the best plans can falter." Jasper Withers, leaning against the carved mantel, added his own confession. "I traded secrets with the Viscount of Inverness to secure Silas Crowley's help in a heist. I believed Crowley's loyalty could be bought with rare jewels. Instead, he absconded to Amsterdam with both the loot and my ledger, leaving me to answer Madame's wrath and the cold brick cell awaiting letter of release." He chuckled ruefully. "I spent 2 weeks in Newgate reflecting on the perils of trusting criminals. Lesson learned, never deal in half measures." When the round of confessions quieted, Lady Ophelia raised her glass. "Each of us has danced on the razor's edge," she said, "yet here we stand, wiser, sharper, free in ways the streets cannot imagine. We are no longer merely inmates of this house. We are its architects, its silent governors." The women nodded, their faces set with fierce pride. But the night was not yet over. A soft knock sounded at the secret panel. Dusty Tom peered in, muddy cap in hand. "A gentleman requests your counsel," he whispered. It was Sir Percival Thorne, a reform-minded MP who'd read Emily's pamphlet and now sought Lady Ophelia's guidance on drafting fair trade laws for brothels. The circle exchanged looks. This was the moment their whispered alliances could reshape society. As Thorne entered, Madame Selwyn whispered to Emily, "Your words echo in halls of power now, child. Never doubt their reach." The group dispersed into smaller clusters. Betsy and Jasper slipped away to retrieve the hidden ledger. Emily and Selwyn prepared documents to share with Thorne. Mrs. Bracken summoned her couriers to ready silent dispatches to Bath. Lady Emerald and Ophelia plotted the next phase of legal pressure by drafting letters to sympathetic peers. Each woman moved with purpose born of hard lessons, betrayals transformed into strategies, redemptions into policy proposals. By dawn, the hidden world had shifted again. The House of Amiable Company would supply eyewitness testimonies to the House of Commons. Bath spa owners agreed to sponsor displaced workers under the guise of health retreats, and a tentative network of safe houses bloomed across England. The personal odysseys of these legendary figures, triumphs and downfalls, betrayals and redemptions, had converged into a coherent movement demanding justice. As morning light seeped through the dusty windows, Lady Ophelia stood on the threshold of the hidden parlor, watching her sisters depart to their varied tasks. She touched the breast of her velvet gown, where a tiny blue rose brooch blinked in the dawn. "Today," she murmured, "we step into the light they never imagined." And with that, the architects of the hidden world of 18th century brothels melted back into the streets of London, each carrying a piece of the parlor's power, ready to rewrite the rules of history in their own daring image. As dawn broke on the fourth day of our hidden odyssey, a hushed excitement rippled through the corridors of Madame Thackeray's House of Amiable Company. The secret alliances forged in candlelit chambers were about to meet the bright glare of public scrutiny, courtesy of Sir Percival Thorne's carefully orchestrated parliamentary inquiry. But within these walls, every whisper was both weapon and shield, and no one moved without purpose. The morning began with a flurry of preparation. In the corridor outside Lady Ophelia's private salon, Betsy Blush and Jasper Withers convened over the hidden ledger. By lamplight the night before, they had transcribed redacted entries, client names replaced with coded initials, and compiled witness statements into a neat bundle bound with crimson ribbon. Now they affixed small dispatch tags to each packet, directing them to sympathetic MPs and Reform Society contacts. "Half of them will never read past the title," Jasper murmured, "but that's why we gild the lead page with scandal." Betsy nodded, tucking the bundles under her arm like precious jewels. Meanwhile, Emily Ravenwood and Madame Selwyn conferred in the adjacent room, quills scratching furiously against the parchment. They were drafting the official testimony, a concise account of living conditions, medical abuses, and the clandestine economy of bribes and blackmail. Their tone walked a razor's edge, imploring compassion without descending into sensationalism that Parliament might dismiss as mere salacious gossip. Each sentence was polished until it rang with irony. "We, the undersigned inhabitants of a private parlor, humbly request that our mortal coils not be compressed so tightly that our lungs resemble harvested grapes." By mid-morning, the corridors, filled with a procession of discreet messengers, maidservants in sober livery, stable hands with muddy boots, even the occasional footman in lace cravat. They bore letters sealed with Lady Ophelia's jasmine-scented cipher, each destined to land on the doorstep of power. Madame Thackeray, glimpsing the bustle from her inner sanctum, raised an eyebrow beneath her opium-frosted gaze. She suspected nothing more nefarious than routine dispatches to distant suppliers. At high noon, the House of Commons convened its Committee on Private Establishments in a hushed chamber lined with velvet drapes. Sir Percival Thorne presented the first packet, the hidden ledger, annotated with scandalous footnotes. He allowed a beat of silence before unfurling Betsy's bold declaration. Madame Thackeray's house profited from life insurance policies taken out on its workers, each death netting a sovereign for the undertaker and a rebate for the proprietor. "Oh," collective gasp fluttered through the assembly. Sir Percival paused, then added, "We have here sworn testimony from the very women whose voices have long been muted behind those velvet curtains." He gestured, and the door swung open to admit Emily Ravenwood, her pale countenance framed by powdered hair. As she recited her carefully honed statement, lords and MPs exchanged looks of shock and fascination. Back at the brothel, Lady Emerald paced the plush carpet of the rose garden, awaiting news. Jasper slipped in, face alight with triumph. "It's done," he whispered. "Parliament's first reading passed with amendments, compulsory medical inspections for private parlors, limits on corset tightness, and mandatory meal provisions. They even subpoenaed our medical logs." Emerald exhaled, the tension draining from her shoulders. "And the bath network?" she asked. Jasper smiled. Already in motion, 5 apprentices left by moonlight for Bristol. Their safe houses await. In the afternoon sun, the house held its breath. Madame Thackeray surveyed her domain, bemused as constables with innocuous clipboards strolled the halls. They checked ration records, glanced at linen stocks, and departed with polite excuses about routine checks. Unbeknownst to her, every question they asked was scripted by Ophelia and her counsel to satisfy the letter of the law while preserving the house's secrecy. When one officer questioned the absence of a registry for leeches in the infirmary, Mrs. Bracken quietly offered a manuscript on medicinal herbs instead, an old midwife's handbook that passed far more readily than a foul leech ledger ever would. As evening approached, the house prepared for its next grand maneuver, the first annual convention of private parlors, to be held under parliamentary auspices. Representatives would gather in the very rooms where illicit whispers once dominated, now repurposed as conference chambers. Lady Ophelia, appointed liaison to the Board of Regulation, delivered guidelines on fair wages, health protocols, and grievance procedures. Courtesans and madams from across London attended, receiving bronze medallions, each stamped with a delicate rose emblem to signify compliance. The sight of stiff-lipped proprietors accepting medals crafted by their former charges was the sweetest spectacle of all. Late that night, the house's conspirators convened in the hidden parlor for a subdued celebration. They poured rare Madeira wine into chipped glasses, sharing soft laughter at the absurdity of it all. Reformers literally meeting inside a former brothel to legislate morality. They toasted to their own metamorphosis, from exploited inmates to architects of reform, and to the countless women who would never know their names but would breathe freer because of their fight. Madame Thackeray, summoned by polite invitation, entered with her entourage. She regarded the revelers with a curious mix of suspicion and amusement. Lady Ophelia stepped forward, presenting the madam with a gilded certificate, honorary patron of private establishments, inscribed with gold leaf. Your cooperation has transformed the house into a model of humane enterprise, Ophelia intoned. Madame, recognizing the honor as both applause and subtle admonishment, inclined her head. Beneath her pinched smile, she acknowledged that her empire would survive, reformed and forced to respect the women whose labor had sustained it. At last, the women dispersed to their quarters. In her own modest attic room, Mrs. Bracken carefully folded Rosamond's broken doll, laying it on a shelf alongside the sealed tin bearing the true ledgers. She whispered an apology to the ghost of her lost apprentice and vowed that no other would vanish so easily. By the final dawn of this hidden world's renaissance, the house of amiable company had become legend, a living testament that even in the darkest alleys, women could wield secrets as shields and stories as swords. Apprentices learned not only the art of seduction and diplomacy, but also the power of collective voice. Former mistresses became managers whose first priority was worker welfare, and a network of safe houses stretched from Bristol's spas to Edinburgh's tenements, ready to embrace any seeking refuge. When you next wander through the Georgian streets and imagine powdered wigs and flickering lamps, remember that behind those curtained doorways lay not only misery, but also ingenuity, resilience, and the quiet heroism of women who refused to be silent. The hidden world of 18th century brothels was more than an abyss of exploitation. It was ultimately a crucible that forged a new blueprint for power, one stitched together from lace, ledger paper, and unbreakable bonds of solidarity. Imagine trading your family name for a silken slipper beside a powerful lord's hearth, knowing your worth measured not in kindness or talent, but in the width of his smile. And that smile was your ticket out of starvation. Welcome to the perilous bargain of becoming a mistress in a world that offered no better choices. She was 18 when her father's mill burned, and her mother's tears ran hotter than the forge. With 5 mouths to feed and no dowry to speak of, Charlotte Winslow learned quickly that virtue would not pay the rent. When Lord Ashcombe, a widower with a penchant for poetry and brandy, offered her refuge and a roof over their head, she accepted his gilded cage. Yet every whispered compliment hid an unspoken contract, compliance in exchange for safety. Life in Ashcombe Hall began with satin slippers and rose-covered gowns, but each morning Charlotte awoke to the cold truth that she was a curio on display. At breakfast, she brushed crumbs from the table as Lady Ashcombe's portrait glared down, a memorial to duties unfulfilled. The housekeeper read her like an open ledger, tallying her failures. A slip of the neckline, a shaky curtsy, too much color in her cheeks. Charlotte's place was clear, her conversation polite, her laughter measured, her body ever present yet never truly hers. In the parlors, she was trained in the art of attachment, how to lean in as he spoke of his political schemes, feign fascination at his recounting of battles she could neither pronounce nor comprehend, and nod sagely when he sighed about the emptiness of aristocratic life. Each carefully choreographed gesture earned her tokens of favor, jeweled brooches, silken petticoats, and most precious of all, his time. By candlelight, he invited her to read Byron's verses aloud, his voice trembling as if her words were the last flicker of humanity in his opulent world. Yet the safety he provided carried its own price. When Charlotte's younger sister came begging for a shred of hope, she found herself bargaining for permission to share her bedchamber's modest warmth. Her letters home were censored. The steward inspected each page for impropriety, blackening lines he deemed too revealing. At night, beneath perfumed sheets, Charlotte counted her breaths as though tracking gold coins, knowing each exhale affirmed her position, and each inhale reminded her of the life she had surrendered. A mistress's world was one of concealed hierarchies. She observed the house's two daughters, Lady Penelope and Lady Matilda, taught etiquette and embroidery by governesses whose patience ran thinner than the girls' ribbons. Charlotte envied their innocence, their prospects of advantageous marriages, and most of all, their unbroken ties to families who would fight for them. Her own name fell like ashes on her tongue whenever she dared speak it aloud. She was reborn as Madame's companion, an invisible ornament hidden behind closed doors. The social whirl of Ashcombe's circle revealed another facet of the mistress's life. She was neither wife nor servant, yet expected to perform both roles. At dinner parties, she refilled port glasses and engaged in idle chatter, lest anyone question her presence at the edge of the head table. Gentlemen offered polite bows and glances, testing her reaction. A sharp retort could earn admiration or contempt. A timid nod guaranteed invisibility. She learned to calibrate her responses like a musician tuning strings. Just enough sympathy to soothe his vanity, just enough wit to keep him intrigued. Though richly clothed and sheltered, Charlotte discovered that vulnerability was never far behind. One winter, when Lord Ashcombe fell ill with a fever that stole his voice, she watched the household's loyalty shift. The butler refused her orders, pointing instead to Lady Ashcombe's empty portrait, muttering of Lady Penelope's better breeding. The other servants avoided her gaze in the hallways, as if her presence carried ill fate. Only when she sat at his bedside, reading medical journals by firelight and applying poultices, did she earn back a glimmer of respect, proof that her usefulness extended beyond mere adornment. Survival as a mistress required mastering secrecy. Charlotte carried a slip of parchment hidden in her garter, a ledger of hush payments she collected for delivering messages to her lover's political allies. Each entry recorded the recipient's name, the sum exchanged, and a cryptic note on loyalty. Her mistress status granted her access to private corridors and locked cabinets. She became both confidant and courier, smuggling letters sealed with wax into folders Lady Penelope dared not touch. This clandestine role wove her tightly into Ashcombe's power network, yet also bound her ever closer to its dangers. Her greatest lesson arrived on a spring evening at a masked ball in the grand ballroom. Half-masked courtiers waltzed beneath glittering chandeliers as Charlotte, draped in moonlit pearls, spied her governess, clandestinely passing a small satchel to a visiting baron. Heart-pounding, she realized the satchel contained letters naming influential staff members who sympathized with the French Revolution, a charge of treason that could cost lives. With a trembling hand, she retrieved the satchel and replaced it with a decoy of dried lavender. The baron departed none the wiser. Back in the ladies' apartments, Charlotte sent the real letters to Lord Ashcombe's ally in Whitehall, winning his deep gratitude. Yet that night, she learned that each act of loyalty or betrayal could tip the scales of life and death. In the quiet hours before dawn, Charlotte penned a secret journal, binding each page with silk ribbon and burying it beneath the floorboards. She wrote of stolen kisses in moonlit galleries, of whispered promises broken by duty, and of the hollow ache in her bones when she realized that love was never free, it was collateral to power. Her journal became both diary and manifesto, a testament to the absurd contradictions that shaped her survival. By the end of her first year as mistress, Charlotte had accrued privileges few women of her birth could claim: a private suite of rooms overlooking rose gardens, an annual stipend more generous than some dowries, and a say in household appointments. Yet she also carried the weight of forced invisibility, her reputation perpetually balanced on a knife's edge, a single scandalous rumor enough to send her back into the cold streets she once fled. Every gift he bestowed contained both kindness and caution, a bracelet inscribed with her initials, but a note reminding her of the fragility of favor. And so Charlotte Winslow, once the miller's daughter, navigated Ashcombe Hall with ironclad resolve disguised as silken grace. She learned to read each corridor's shadows, to anticipate the steward's glances, and to cloak her ambitions beneath layers of polite compliance. Being a mistress was her only way out, and she played her part with a mixture of irony, pragmatism, and quiet defiance. Charlotte's second year under Lord Ashcombe's roof began with the arrival of spring's first thaw, but for her it brought neither renewal nor respite, only a deeper plunge into the perilous dance between power and survival. The long winter evenings had honed her skills in discreet observation and coded dispatches. Now, as the gardens burst into bloom, she faced new challenges, managing her patron's fragile reputation, safeguarding her precarious position, and, most perilously, navigating the ever-shifting alliances of the ton. Her morning still began at dawn, though dawn in Ashcombe Hall meant service bells rather than sunbeams. She dressed by candlelight in gowns of sprigged muslin and buttercup silk, careful to select hues that complemented rather than competed with Lady Penelope's pale complexion. A misstep in color could spark a quiet rivalry, one that might reach Lord Ashcombe's ears in the form of a passing comment from an overzealous maid. Today she chose a gentle primrose shade, attending to every pleat of her petticoat, every pin that secured her bodice. The task was ritual. As she smoothed her hair into subdued curls, she reviewed her morning script, deferential greetings, timely anecdotes drawn from the latest political pamphlet, and a ready smile for the steward's routine complaints. Breakfast was a study in careful choreography. She poured tea from a porcelain urn etched with his family crest, her hand steady, her posture impeccable, while Lady Penelope sat silent, her eyes averted in polite decorum. Only when the conversation turned to estate matters did Lord Ashcombe address Charlotte by name, his tone warm but guarded. "Charlotte, I trust the spring accounts arrived from Marchmont?" She nodded, pulling from her reticule a small leather ledger she'd secreted the night before. "Indeed, my lord, the figures show a surplus of £200, largely thanks to the new tenants on the Eastern Manor." He studied her for a moment, as though verifying her claim, then inclined his head in satisfaction. Her heart fluttered at his approval, though she dared not let her relief show. By mid-morning, Charlotte's duties shifted from parlor to politics. As Lord Ashcombe's unofficial aide-de-camp, she drafted letters to local magistrates, critiqued parliamentary speeches, and even accompanied him to council meetings when discretion required a female presence. In the hushed corridors of Whitehall, she learned to stand just beyond the door's arch, close enough to catch nuances in tone, distant enough to avoid scrutiny. She took meticulous notes, disguised as shorthand jottings in her pocket diary, later deciphered under the soft glow of her bedside candle. These notes became her leverage, proof that her contributions extended far beyond mere ornamentation. Yet it was at the pleasure gardens one afternoon that Charlotte confronted the razor's edge of her reality. A carriage rolled in bearing Lady Aubrey, a widowed duchess with a notorious reputation for scandal. Rumors swirled that she intended to challenge Charlotte's position, hoping to supplant the mistress as the man of the house's confidant. Lady Aubrey descended, draped in burgundy velvet, her gaze sharp and measured as she surveyed Charlotte's primrose dress. The Duchess approached, offering a perfumed handkerchief. "My dear," she purred, "I've heard of your talents with household accounts. Perhaps you could advise me on my Ravenshire estate?" The invitation was a test, a subtle probe to unveil Charlotte's ambitions. Accept too eagerly, and she'd appear grasping; decline too firmly, and she'd slight a powerful peer. Charlotte inclined her head with grace. "I would be honored to assist your grace. I find financial ledgers most illuminating." She spoke the words with practiced poise, masking the frisson of fear beneath her calm tone. The Duchess's smile flickered. Satisfied, Charlotte suspected that she'd both offered service and signaled compliance. That evening, Charlotte retired to her sanctuary, a small sitting room hidden behind the library shelves. Inside, she transformed from parlor maiden to strategist. She spread maps of Ashcombe estates across a walnut table, marking parcels needing maintenance, rent due dates, and potential improvements. She considered Lady Aubrey's overture. An alliance with the Duchess could strengthen her standing, but at the risk of drawing Lady Penelope's ire and the steward's suspicion, she weighed her options with a strategist's mind, knowing that every decision carried the potential to fortify or fracture her gilded cage. As night deepened, a soft rap on the door heralded a trusted ally. Miss Edith Harrow, Lady Aubrey's former maid, turned Charlotte's confidant. Edith slipped inside, lowering her voice. "My lady," she murmured. "The Duchess fears her own scandals catching up to her. She seeks absolution, wishes to be seen doing good. She'd sponsor your new school for Ashcombe's tenant children, but only if you publicly align with her." Charlotte's chest tightened. A public alliance with Aubrey would signal ambition, and ambition in a mistress was often the prelude to ruin. Yet the promise of opening a charitable school could endear Charlotte to the local gentry, perhaps even to Lord Ashcombe's sister, mistresses of benevolence. They plotted late into the night, a discreet gala at Ashcombe Hall, invitations to notable reformers, a fundraising concert featuring Charlotte's own delicate soprano. She would host, Lady Aubrey would patronize, and the local press, carefully bribed with early handbills, would spin the event as a triumph of moral leadership. Such a pageant could recast the mistress as a benefactor rather than a scandalous interloper. It was risky, but in Charlotte's assessment, the rewards outweighed the dangers. Over the following weeks, Ashcombe Hall buzzed with rumors of the forthcoming benevolence gala. Servants whispered of new carriage shipments, pianos, lace draperies, and imported flowers. Lady Aubrey arrived, her entourage in tow, and Charlotte welcomed her in the rose garden under polite smiles. Together, they reviewed guest lists, philanthropic societies, childhood friends of Lord Ashcombe, and a handful of former lovers of Aubrey who now touted her reformation. Each name was selected to maximize applause and minimize scandal. On the night of the gala, the hall glowed with lanterns and chandeliers, framed by bouquets of white lilies. Musicians from the king's own ensemble played soft preludes as guests arrived, their gowns and coats whispering across polished marble. Charlotte, in a gown of dove-gray silk, greeted each visitor, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Lady Aubrey watched from the foot of the grand staircase, her glossy hair reflecting torchlight as she discreetly nodded approval. During the concert's intermission, Charlotte ascended the dais, voice clear and poised. She spoke of the school's mission to educate the children of tenant farmers, a promise to break cycles of poverty and desperation. Her speech balanced humility with conviction, weaving in personal anecdotes of her own struggles to access education. Ladies in embroidered gowns dabbed tears, gentlemen murmured congratulations. As she stepped down to applause, Charlotte locked eyes with Lord Ashcombe in the front row, his expression a mixture of pride and something deeper, harder to discern. In the weeks that followed, the school opened to fanfare. Charlotte oversaw classes, teaching reading and arithmetic to eager children, her heart warmed by their laughter and curiosity. She visited the classrooms in polished boots, disguised as the benefactor rather than the mistress, her reputation quietly shifting from ornament to advocate. Lady Penelope, initially cold, approached her one evening, offering gratitude on behalf of the family. "You do more good here than many titled ladies," she admitted softly. Charlotte's careful smile masked the thrill of validation and the dawn of a new confidence. Yet even as she basked in this triumph, the specter of scandal loomed. One afternoon, she discovered a letter slipped beneath her door in Ashcombe Hall. The seal bore Lady Aubrey's crest, but inside were threats. Rumors of a vengeful cousin who planned to out both women in the press, accusing Charlotte of blackmailing the Duchess into public patronage. The letter's final line chilled Charlotte's blood. "Soon, the delicate balance of your escape will shatter like fragile glass." Clutching the missive, Charlotte realized that every victory invited fresh dangers. She must now navigate a web of counter-intrigue, protect her school, shield Lady Aubrey's reputation, and secure her own position, all while ensuring Lord Ashcombe remained blissfully unaware of the weaponized rumors. She placed the letter in her reticule and drew a deep breath. The next moves would require all her cunning, courage, and iron discipline. Thus ended the second act of Charlotte Winslow's ascent from impoverished miller's daughter to masterful mistress turned philanthropist. In part 3, we will delve into the storm of scandal that threatened to engulf her, and the alliances she forged to withstand it, revealing how, when being a mistress was the only way out, survival depended on rewriting the rules of power itself. The morning after the threatening letter arrived, Charlotte rose before dawn, heart pounding like a startled drum. She lit a single candle in her private sitting room and studied the parchment again. Lady Aubrey's crest was expertly rendered, but the tremor in the ink betrayed fear as much as malice. Whoever penned this knew exactly how to wound, by threatening the one lifeline Charlotte had forged beyond Ashcombe Hall's gilded cage. Her first move was to secure the school's safety. She summoned her headmistress, Mrs. Cartwright, to the summer house overlooking the rose garden. Under gentle sunlight, Charlotte revealed the letter and instructed the governess to prepare contingency plans, lock the school's funds in a new trust, hire discreet guards for the children's journey home, and draft circulars to local gentry, explaining that any scandalous rumors would be met with libel suits. Mrs. Cartwright, once a timid wallflower, straightened her spine and pledged her loyalty. "The children will be safe, madam," she promised, "no matter the storm." Next, Charlotte confronted Lady Aubrey herself. In the Duchess's private withdrawing room, silken drapes pale blue as morning mist, she laid out the letter. Aubrey's lipstick, always the exact shade of blush, quivered as she read. "My dear," Aubrey whispered, "I never thought my past would come chasing me like a hound." Charlotte placed a steadying hand on her arm. "We will face this together. Your reputation and mine are entwined now. We must turn this weapon back on its wielder." They devised a counter-assault, an invitation-only garden fete, publicized as Lady Aubrey's tribute to rural arts. Every local magnate, clergyman, and press correspondent would attend, hosted by Charlotte and the Duchess together, no shadows permitted. Should any rival dare to spread scandal, the full breadth of Ashcombe's social network would rally in their defense, drowning rumors beneath polite applause and social proof. In the days that followed, Charlotte navigated Ashcombe Hall with vigilance. The steward, whose eyes flicked with suspicion, found Charlotte's discreet authority reinforced by Lord Ashcombe himself, who quietly commended her oversight of the school and fete preparations. Under her calm exterior, Charlotte felt the sting of betrayal, realizing that even those she considered allies could harbor envy. Late one evening, she intercepted a note from the housekeeper, warning that Lady Penelope had been overheard suggesting Charlotte's ambitions out of place. Charlotte folded the note into her reticule, another card to play when needed. The garden fete dawned bright and clear. Guests arrived in carriages drawn by dappled greys, stepping onto carpets of wildflowers. Musicians strummed lutes beneath trellises woven with honeysuckle. Charlotte and Lady Aubrey stood side by side at the entrance, greeting each newcomer with fluid grace. A hush fell whenever they passed, a living tableau of unity that silenced murmurs. Courtiers approached with bouquets and sonnets, praising the mistress who'd saved Lady Aubrey's honor and elevated Ashcombe's cultural repute. By midday, Charlotte sensed the scandal's threat recede, suffocated under a barrage of public goodwill. But resilience demanded more than a single triumph. That evening, Charlotte retreated to her sanctuary and wrote letters to two powerful allies, Lord Ashcombe's sister, Lady Mary Berkeley, and Sir Percival Thorne, the reform-minded MP. She enclosed copies of Mrs. Cartwright's trust documents and praised Aubrey's charitable works. Both responded within hours, Lady Mary offering to host the school's next term in her London townhouse should Ashcombe's scandal resurface, Thorne pledging to intervene in Parliament against any defamatory proposals. With these alliances cemented, Charlotte felt the underpinnings of her world grow sturdier, yet no fortress was impregnable. A week later, late by lamplight, Charlotte discovered that her private journals, buried beneath floorboards, had been rifled through. Pages detailing her smuggling of political letters and coded dispatches were turned to the wall. their contents now used to threaten her with treason. Someone within Ashcombe Hall had betrayed her most intimate confidence. The betrayal cut deeper than any external threat. It meant that Charlotte's closest circle had been compromised. She summoned Edith Harrow, her loyal former maid, to the oak-paneled library. Edith's eyes glistened with tears. "I'm so sorry, my lady. I discovered a note from Marcus, the steward's confidant, suggesting he'd been bribed to search your chamber. I managed to hide the journal, but I fear not all your secrets were saved." Charlotte exhaled slowly. The enemy lurked within these walls. "We must root out the leak," she replied, voice steady. "Gather our most trusted ones, Mrs. Cartwright, the head gardener, Mr. Holloway, and Thomas the footman. Tonight, we convene in the summer house." Under a midnight sky, candlelight tremulous in the breeze, Charlotte led the small council. Each volunteered an account of suspicious movements, the steward lingering by her door, the cook suddenly interested in her visitors' schedules, and the butler's newfound familiarity with Marcus. Piece by piece, the evidence coalesced, and at dawn, they had names. Armed with knowledge, Charlotte drafted ultimatums, loyalty sealed with signatures and threats veiled in gallant courtesy. When the steward was summoned the next morning, he found himself face to face with Lady Mary, Sir Percival Thorne, and Charlotte's inner circle. Blanching, he confessed to being blackmailed by a rival mistress, Lady Penelope's distant cousin, who had offered him a share of Charlotte's forced allowances in exchange for secrets. Charlotte's calm gaze never wavered as she laid out three options: permanent exile from Ashcombe Hall, public disclosure of his betrayal, or immediate payment of back wages to the school's trust. He chose exile, any privilege a mistress could wield over a servant, and his departure rippled through the household, a warning to any who dared betray her again. With the internal threat extinguished, Charlotte felt a fleeting sense of peace. In her private chamber, she retrieved the journals, sealing them within a new steel-locked chest. Each entry now bore annotations in her neat hand, cross-referencing allies, dates, and evidence. A personal archive of her transformation from vulnerable pawn to shrewd strategist. By the end of Part 3, Charlotte Winslow stood at the pinnacle of her precarious ascent. Mistress, educator, clandestine diplomat, and master of her own fate. She had weathered scandal, forged powerful alliances, and routed betrayal from within. Yet the horizon remained uncertain. New intrigues beckoned, and her gilded path through Ashcombe Hall would demand fresh acts of courage. But for the moment, she allowed herself a rare smile, knowing that when survival meant becoming a mistress, she had become something far more formidable. The dawn of her 4th year at Ashcombe Hall broke with a clarity Charlotte had rarely known. Gone were the silken mists of apprehension and the gilded cages of doubt. In their place lay a hard-won command of her destiny. Yet, even as spring's light filtered through the mullioned windows, Charlotte faced her most delicate challenge, transforming her fragile authority into an enduring legacy, one that could outlast the whims of any lord or duchess. Her first task was practical, securing a formal title that reflected her evolving role. Under Sir Percival Thorne's guidance, she petitioned for recognition as Lady Visitor of the Ashcombe Charity Trust. It was a compromise. Neither mistress nor wife, but a legal persona whose rights and responsibilities were spelled out in paper rather than perfumed whispers. The Crown's lawyers, intrigued by the novelty, scrutinized her case, but ultimately agreed. No woman before had held such a position. When the royal seal arrived on the parchment, Charlotte allowed herself a triumphant smile. She was, at last, more than a secret. She was an institution. That small victory set the tone for the months to come. With Lady Mary Berkeley's patronage, she expanded the charity school into a fully fledged academy, hiring masters skilled in languages, navigation, and arithmetic. The curriculum brimmed with pragmatism. Young girls learned bookkeeping alongside needlework. Boys studied geometry as well as farming techniques. Word spread that Ashcombe Academy produced graduates as capable of managing estates as of stitching seams. Gentlemen visitors tipped hats at her entrance. Clergymen offered sermons in her honor. Even Lady Penelope, initially wary, took to teaching dance lessons in the Academy's spacious hall, delighting in the children's lively giggles. Yet Charlotte's ambitions extended beyond education. Recognizing that her security still hinged on Lord Ashcombe's favor, she devised a plan to stabilize her personal estate. In collaboration with her steward-turned-ally Thomas, she secured a lease on a modest cottage at the edge of the grounds. There, she began planting a walled garden of roses, herbs, and vegetables, a living portfolio of her stewardship. Behind the cottage, she installed a small study lined with her journals and correspondence, ensuring that should political tides shift, she had a sanctuary unbound by Ashcombe's opulence. Meanwhile, her relationship with Lord Ashcombe settled into an uneasy but respectful partnership. They shared dinners in the library, he recounting debates in Parliament, she offering insights into constituency needs she'd gleaned from her school visits. Their conversations, once constrained by formality, grew genuine. He confessed his loneliness after 2 childless marriages. She admitted her fear that all her work might vanish with his next whim. In the quiet glow of candlelight, they negotiated terms of coexistence, a covenant of honesty that, though never romantic, was built on mutual dependence and perhaps a begrudging fondness. But no peace lasts forever in a world built on secrets. The Duchess of Ravenswood, Lady Aubrey's cousin and Charlotte's old adversary, began resurfacing in London's drawing rooms. Rumors swirled that she intended to lobby the King's Privy Council to revoke Charlotte's lady visitor title, arguing that a former mistress had no place in legal scholarship or public office. As whispers reached Ashcombe Hall, Charlotte assembled her allies. Sir Percival Thorne drafted rebuttal briefs citing legal precedent. Lady Mary leveraged her court connections to discredit Ravenswood's motion. Even Lady Penelope marshaled support among the lesser aristocracy, reminding them that Charlotte's academy served their very own neighbors. When the council convened, Charlotte stood in a gallery seat, her posture unyielding as the argument swirled below. Hours passed in tense silence, then at last the Chancellor ruled in her favor. Her title remained intact, her trust unassailable. That legal triumph galvanized Charlotte's resolve. She penned a manifesto, an appeal for women's agency in charity and education, under her new style, Lady Visitor Charlotte Winslow. It argued that women, too long relegated to private spheres, possessed the intellect and compassion to guide public welfare. The pamphlet sold briskly in London's coffee houses and was later reprinted in Edinburgh. Critics called it audacious, Charlotte called it necessary. Each copy carried her signature. Each signature carried the weight of her journey from penniless spinster to respected civic leader. By now, the academy boasted 100 pupils, and Charlotte's garden yielded herbs for the infirmary she helped fund in the local parish. She hosted annual festivals under cherry trees, where graduates displayed their skills, sewing gowns, reciting poetry, charting maps. The people of Ashcombe village honored her with garlands and dances. Even the once hostile stewards now spoke her name with reverence. To her astonishment, she found herself crafting wills for tenants and advising the lord of the neighboring estate, an influence unimaginable when she had nervously curtsied to deliver a ledger. Yet, as her power grew, Charlotte never forgot the frailty of position. She maintained the walled garden but left one gate unlocked, a symbol that no wall should be high enough to keep truth out. She continued her secret journals, not to conceal but to document, detailed accounts of palace visits, school expansions, political maneuvers, and warnings of emerging threats. Should history forget her, the journals would speak for her. The crowning achievement came in the spring of her 5th year. The king, impressed by parliamentary reports and the academy's success, granted her a charter establishing Ashcombe Academy as the first charitable institution with governance by women. A board of trustees was formed, 2 noblewomen, 2 clergymen, and Charlotte as chair. That day, she donned a simple gown of dove gray, stepped onto the academy's dais, and addressed the assembled throng. Let every child, regardless of birth, learn to read. Let every woman find purpose beyond the spun thread. Let this institution stand as proof that necessity can forge opportunity, even from the narrowest escape. The crowd erupted in applause, an echo of the milestone she had become. News of her success carried to distant corners. Reformers in Bath extolled her charter. Noble women in Edinburgh petitioned for similar models. Pamphleteers in Dublin hailed her as the miller's daughter who rewrote her fate. Charlotte's name, a once obscene whisper, became a byword for tenacity and vision. On the final morning of this chapter in Ashcombe Hall, Charlotte walked the rose garden alone. The ancient bushes bloomed in riotous color, each flower a testament to the care she had bestowed. She paused by the walled cottage and gazed toward the sunrise slanting over the hills. She thought of her father's mill, of the smoke that once choked her childhood, and of the moment she had accepted Lord Ashcombe's offer. It had seemed a gilded prison then, yet it had become her proving ground. In that moment, she made a choice, to remain as Lady Visitor, guiding the Academy's future, or to step away entirely, forging an independent life beyond Ashcombe's legacy. As the morning breeze stirred the rose petals, she smilingly remembered the bargain that had saved her life. The price of a man's favor weighed against her own survival. Now, she would pay a new price, the freedom to determine her fate completely. Charlotte Winslow, once mistress by necessity, had transcended her role. She was now architect of her own destiny, a pioneer in women's agency, and the living proof that when being a mistress was the only way out, courage and cunning could open doors no corset could ever bind. And so, with the garden at her back and the world at her feet, Lady Visitor Charlotte Winslow stepped into the next chapter, one forged not by necessity, but by the unbreakable will of a woman who refused to be defined by anyone's terms but her own.